Hey, everybody, and welcome to GameDive for March of 2021. GameDive is the conversation gaming show where we discuss one game each episode and give our thoughts and opinions. I'm Perry, and joining me for today's show is Cam
G'day.
and Evan.
Hey guys.
Today's episode, we're looking at Control, the sci-fi paranormal action adventure shooter. Control was, of course, made by Remedy Entertainment, a Finnish studio, as in from Finland. They were the same people to bring us the first two Max Payne titles, along with Alan Wake and more recently Quantum Break. Control was released worldwide for PC, Xbox One, and PlayStation 4 on August 27th, and later ported to Nintendo Switch, Xbox Series X, and PlayStation 5. The game has reportedly sold over 2 million copies across all platforms as of December of 2020. As with every episode of Game Dive, this will be a spoiler heavy discussion. So definitely check out the game before listening if that's something you're planning to do. And just for a quick rundown on what the game is, Control is a third person action adventure shooter at its core. You play as Jessie Faden, a woman looking for her brother who was abducted years ago by a shadowy government agency known as the Federal Bureau of Control. The entire game takes place inside the FBC, as it's called, Federal Bureau of Control, or the headquarters thereof, which is known as the Oldest House, a government research facility dedicated to studying and containing paranatural materials and oddities. The actual gameplay revolves around using the service weapon, a transforming pistol, and your character's own supernatural abilities to uh, hurl objects or float through the air to fight corrupted agents while you explore the Oldest House to try and find your brother and get things under control. Am I right?
Thanks for coming, folks.
Yeah, that's gonna be it. It's been a real struggle not to incorporate control related puns into every bit of media here. I was thinking we'll probably just start off with maybe everyone's overall impressions, like just whatever you want to say. If you want to start, Evan.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, off the bat, like, I love this game. Really, really enjoyed my time with it. Did take a little break in the middle of playing for a while.
Little break for 2 years.
Little break. But once I came back to it, and not to say that I stopped because I disliked it, but once I came back to it, it sort of established my love for the game, honestly. And that isn't to say I don't see like some places it can improve, obviously, but yeah, I think it does sort of what it went out to do really well. I think it has a really compelling story, compelling characters, and a really intriguing kind of world that you explore and
For sure.
sort of interact with. And it's not a long game. I think on average probably clocks in around 20 hours on the higher end for most people. At least for the main part of the game.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. And for that, I think it's absolutely like I'd recommend it to anyone, honestly. Like if you have 20 hours to spare over a month, pick this game up. If it was free recently, I think on PlayStation Plus.
Big shout out to PS Plus again.
Once again, yeah.
Low-key funding the show.
Subsidizing us.
So if you picked it up and you haven't played it yet, stop listening. Don't stop listening, but stop listening right now, and go play. Like start it up, and I can almost guarantee that you would get engrossed in the first 20 minutes.
Yeah, that opening bit is definitely pretty intense, pretty interesting. What do you think about it, Kim?
Well, I'll start by laying out my character structure for the episode. I'm going to be taking the stance of the antagonist for this podcast, because if I'm totally honest, and I obviously think that you guys don't share this opinion, I probably would not have finished the game for the podcast.
Really?
I thought that it was supposed to be a narrative-driven game, that, the gameplay suffers and it's not the main focus, and then there was not really a whole lot of intriguing story for the most part. I will say that at the beginning of the game, yeah, I was very intrigued with it. I thought that the atmosphere that they created and the characters they introduced with and the voice acting was good at the start, but then I can't put a place on it. Just like partway through the game, I just like was feeling, why am I playing this anymore? It just sort of lost all steam for me.
Yeah,
So
and I can acknowledge that definitely in the middle of the game, it kind of falls off a bit. It loses a bit of focus, and
mhm.
you know, you do realize like, hold on a sec, like what happened to that like narrative line I was following like a while ago?
Well, that seems to happen constantly where they'll throw in sort of like a plot point or like some character development, and then as if it was anime, it's never heard from again. It's just gone.
Well, I do think that saying that it does fall off near the middle. I do think they kind of reel it in at the end, not to perfect effect where it seemed like
Well,
flawless.
hold on a sec here. I'm gonna reel it in a bit, if you don't mind. We'll definitely get there. I assure you. I mean, for me, I'm definitely in the seat of having enjoyed this game a lot myself as well. Um, but Evan, you said something earlier. You said that the game does well at what it wants to.
Mm.
What do you think the game wanted to do?
I think what it wanted to do was give the player sort of a sense of wonder and like a drive to want to explore this world that they're presented with, and through that get a bit of drive because of the the light narrative in it's a woman who's looking for her estranged brother who was, as you said, abducted at a young age. I think it does that well. It's not a save the world superpowers shooter.
Hmm.
It's a woman looking for her brother. Uh, so there, I think it does that well. And I think the weak point in the game is the moment to moment gameplay. I think that's what a lot of people might say that it well, not bad. It isn't standout of the game as a whole.
Maybe.
Yeah. So
I would say, well, like we're gonna talk probably about gameplay first because that's our MO, but
yeah.
I I disagree that it even tells a decent story or any of that. And I
Right.
don't think the exploration is any good. Like I don't know, we'll get into it,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah. Well,
I
of course we will. Yes.
I got issues with a
But
lot
what
of
I
that.
was what I was gonna say though is that I think given those first 2 points, uh, the gameplay, the moment to moment gameplay, isn't one of the things that it is necessarily aiming to do exceptionally.
And I
You
think you
know,
can sort of see that across most of the Remedy games
Yeah,
that aren't called
absolutely.
Max Payne. But
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Alan Wake, I just played recently as well, is, a linear, like narrative focused game, like pretty simple gameplay by comparison, even to something like Control. So it's definitely clear that that was their intention, is kind of more of a narrative focus, like to kind of drive the player through the world. That being said, it's, yeah, like you said, I think struggles in a lot of areas. And I think the one thing that for me I struggled with the most was, um, so you find a lot of notes and a lot of videos, a lot of
hmm
audio recordings, all kinds of things to stop and look at or stop and read, stop and listen
yeah,
to,
kind of
which
tertiary
is,
story elements.
yeah, for sure. And I'll start by saying I love a lot of that stuff. I really do enjoy reading a lot of the files and learning about the
yeah, it can
backstory.
make for great world building.
Absolutely, it makes for great world building. What it makes bad for is good game flow. I
Yeah.
found that in the first 5 or 6 hours, I was stopping maybe every 3 minutes to
Yeah.
like read something.
And at the beginning, like I really liked the beginning because I was
Yeah,
all in on it. I was reading everything I picked up, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm having fun with this." But then it was constant, like the whole experience, and especially when some of the stuff ranges from like interesting lore stuff to cut content for like an office sitcom or like grocery lists. It's just like, why are you wasting my time and stopping the game for
I
me to
mean,
look at this?
you say that, and funnily enough, that was like I enjoyed those little moments. Like I'd stumble upon it, and there's like I think one that stood out to me where it's just an office memo, nothing special, and it's just this is a no smoking area. Stop freaking smoking
Yeah,
in here.
yeah,
It doesn't really add much to the overall narrative, but I liked it because it was like a funny little, this is an office building. This is a
yeah.
bureau that
No, I
people
get
worked
that it
in.
adds a sense of realism to that, but when you're 13 hours in and you've seen 100 of the like,
Eh,
it just
yeah.
to me it's I started letting the unread things pile up, which is something I hate to do in games.
sure. I think for me, at least, like I recognize that you didn't enjoy it very much, and you're Perry, you were kind of like 50-50 on it in a
Well,
way.
here's the stupid thing is I love the notes. I love reading. I love watching this stuff. I hate being distracted from the
Sure,
game
yeah,
though.
Yeah.
And it's a big problem in video games in general, not just in Control,
yeah.
with trying to like convey story
Okay,
without
well, here's something that they
stopping
have
the
done in
gameplay.
other games, like BioShock, famous for audio diaries. Similar thing in this game, except if you walk away from the tape player, the audio
That
goes
yeah,
away.
no, that I
And
fully agree with.
sure, realism I get, but I'm very much of the mind that if you're going for something and you sacrifice gameplay and like
Convenience
and
and
yeah,
like,
game feel for that, then like I'm gonna critique it for that because you
I
made a constant choice to do that. So
no, I fully agree that with that, like as much as I enjoyed them, it was, with the notes at least, like I'm sitting there because I'm reading something, right? Like
mhm.
I'm going through the note. I'm not walking around while I'm reading. Um, but with the audio logs, it's like there's no reason why I can't continue to play and listen at the same time.
Yeah.
You end up standing there for a minute, 2 minutes waiting to
Well, it
listen.
depends on where you are because like
Some have a
sometimes you'll
wider
be
range.
ambling around the environments and sometimes you'll be in these really loud, noisy
Yeah.
gunfights.
Yeah, for me, I think what they could have done there actually is have it start that way where it starts in world, and for the first 5-10 seconds, and then it would sort of transition to just an overlay for the
Yeah.
audio where you can move around and you're still listening to it without
Yeah.
any drop in like audibility.
Hell, she can fly. Give her super hearing. I don't give a shit.
Well, that's the thing. This is like the game universe is set up in such a way that they can pretty much explain away any like
Yeah,
gamey
just say
aspect.
you left a astral projection of your ear just sitting inside the tape
Well,
recorder.
sure, whatever.
No, you
right?
absorb you connect it to an object of power as this toilet paper roll that was laying around
The
and it makes you
magic
hear
toilet
better.
paper
Yeah.
roll, exactly.
You accidentally left the bathroom with it on your foot.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we should explain too that for people who aren't familiar with it, the game does really take inspiration clearly from the SCP Foundation, which is another creative endeavor that's been going on for a long time, and it's a idea I think that stands for secure, contain, protect, and that's what it's based on is these odd objects, paranatural things.
And shadowy government
Yeah,
agency that handles it all. Yeah, it's very analogous. Yeah.
yeah. So I think for people that enjoy that already, then they're gonna love this game and they're gonna love that excessive amount of like little, silly notes and
Yeah,
the
possible.
Well, for sure.
amount of sitting there reading.
So that's the thing. I really enjoy SCP, which is
Same, yeah.
the online like storytelling thing that it is. Um, but if I sit down to read some SCP files, I'm sitting down to read some SCP files. If I
Yeah.
sit down to play Control, I'm trying to play
I think
Control.
that's
And
why
I
I
mean,
enjoyed it, is because in the same
it's a
way I
blending.
enjoyed
Yeah.
it, but I don't think, maybe more than once that I got frustrated with reading the notes, thinking like, I wish I was doing something else. Like, I wish I was just continuing to play
Maybe
right
if the
now.
gameplay was better.
No, I don't know. The reason I didn't mind it is because I really enjoyed taking that 30 seconds to just sit and read there. Because I really enjoyed the creativity and like the ideas behind these objects or
Yeah.
events that they describe. So for me at least, I didn't mind it, but I can absolutely see why
Well, it's not like
people would.
it's
be,
not like I'm opposed to like I like the idea of SCP and I think some of the other games are really cool.
Mm.
It's just like some of the stuff they do is they try to put supernatural meaning to like the mundane or like some of the objects of power. One was like a ramen lantern with like a gravitational field.
Oh
But
yeah.
it's literally in the game. It says it has a minor gravitational pull that attracts things to it. And there was another one that's like a kitchen sink that takes you sightseeing. It's like I get it. It's supernatural, but it's not really
Well, but
interesting.
that's the
This is really the lifeblood of this kind of genre.
yeah, and that's
yeah.
part of why I find it interesting because it's not exceptional. It's not out here trying to be some insane thing. It's like paranormal, but
Well, mundane is really
yeah,
the right word for it.
yeah,
like you
it's
said.
it's
I guess
not
so.
every single object, and there are stronger ones which they classify as objects of power,
Yeah.
which would be those like super power level objects, but it's just the idea that something exists that has some weird uh ability, some weird characteristic
Yeah,
about it.
like some sort of unexplainable
Yeah.
phenomena. Yeah.
And it doesn't need to have purpose. It just is that way.
I guess so. I just think that to the multitude that they have, just the little things, it kind of okay. So I think a lot of my gripe with this comes from not being engaged with the story. You kind of show up and there's like this bodiless force that's kind of taking over people's minds, and it's I don't know, it's kind of hard to take a grasp of, and you want to learn more about this and learn more about where your brother is and stuff like that, and then you're
Mm.
playing for hours and you're like, where's the story? Where's the content?
Yeah, no,
I'm just like yearning for something to happen.
yeah, I mean, definitely in terms of the story, I think that the main storyline and the main quest line is one of the, I finished the game and I was still like wanting so much more from it.
Well,
And
partially because the game ends on like a, oh yeah, things are a little better, I guess, but like you still got to go deal with this
yeah,
stuff.
it's
Pretty
not much of a
anticlimactic.
conclusion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it just kind of like ends and then tells you to go play side quests.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing is it doesn't feel like the game has a lack of content. Like,
Absolutely.
yeah, there's plenty of side stuff, and I still enjoyed it post game. Um, but yeah, it's like you said, you're intrigued in these certain story
Yeah,
aspects, and there isn't much of a payoff for them, and it feels a bit too much like sequel bait,
I guess so.
where
Like
it's
setting up a
yeah,
universe.
and which I absolutely want a sequel because I want to continue to explore this universe, but
I
it
want to continue exploring like the first hour. Like I like the first like when you first are walking around the area, it's like totally deserted. Then you run into Ahti, and Ahti's like this like strange, creepy guy who clearly has some sort of esoteric knowledge that is beyond you at this point.
There's ominous music playing when you
Yeah,
yeah.
first see
I
him.
was like,
Yeah.
I thought that was excellent, and then that disappears for almost the rest of the game.
Yeah, no, Ati was a particularly strange character in that sense, where he is absolutely intriguing, really charismatic,
Well, it's one of those things where okay, something's going on here. I don't understand what.
but
The one
I
character I've
want to
met
in the future.
Well, it was like the one character I've met. I have no idea what his motivations are. He could be trying to help me. He could not be trying to help me. Like it's
But that's good.
yeah,
Yeah, we like
like
that.
it's a
Right.
lot of intrigue.
Yeah,
What I thought was weird about Ati in particular is how disconnected he seemed from the entire rest of the world at large for how important he seemed to be.
well,
Yeah.
that's part of what intrigued me about him. He's clearly above this. Like I was, theorizing throughout the game that maybe he is part of the oldest house. Like he isn't actually a person.
He's some other being.
Yeah, and he there's a lot of reference to the janitor being an important role throughout the game. And
Well, so much so that there's even a janitor's closet in the motel.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So, it shows he has some connection to the paranatural events that have been going on throughout the game and some overall knowledge of like what's going on. But, it's never taken advantage of. They never end up explaining anything about that. Not to say that they that everything needs to be explained, but
It goes on a point to oh now you fill in the blanks.
almost. But even like the last time you talk to him, like in the main storyline, it's like this crazy fever dream sequence, and then that's it.
Or like when he goes on vacation, it's like I don't know if I just missed that, but like
Well, that is the fever dream.
yeah, he just no, I'm feeling he just kind of like walks in out of some inexplicable
Some dream, yeah.
dimension.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm not dismissing that at all. I mean, um, one of the kind of hallmarks of this genre of like speculative fiction or the new weird, as people call it, is this kind of presenting ideas that are like strange and unnatural, and just kind of the intrigue or the horror sometimes coming from that is the unknown.
Yeah.
In this case, though, it was maybe a little too much unknown. Like
Yeah.
we don't really even by the end know his significance to the overall plot
Yeah.
or the overall
Which I
world.
hate. He's
Yeah, I
kind
would
of
have
just
liked
the
to know
janitor
more.
by the end of the game.
And that's the thing, because I enjoyed we're talking about the fever dream sequence, but I really enjoyed that. Like, it was one of the highlights of the game for me. And it's like, you finish it and you're like, you want more of that.
Yeah.
You want some closure on his story thread. You want some sense of, why, or just a bit more about him. But they leave it so much so at, you
Yeah.
know, Ooh, who knows what he is? Like,
Yeah.
there's no sense of
You
you
might as,
will figure this out. You will get some more
you might as
information.
well have just had him walk in on the left of the screen and exit stage right. You know what I mean? Like,
Okay, well, I want to take things in a bit of a different direction here. You've both said that like the main story is kind of underwhelming, and there's other side content and stuff to do. Here's a question: did this game need to be partially open world? Did it need to be open world in any sense at all? Could it have just been
so
linear?
I haven't
Yeah.
played Alan Wake, but to what I understand, a lot of the criticism from that game stems from, and you said it's a linear game
It is 100%
where
linear. There's
it's you
no.
kind of just you move straight, and then similar to this game, you pick up something or something happens anytime any attempt at storytelling or world building, the game grinds to a halt, absolute halt. Whereas in this game, the 3D environment at least leaves you something to kind of
Play.
yeah, or
Yeah.
explore a bit or look around in instead of just heading in the one direction.
Right. And well, I'm glad you brought up Alan Wake because
It's almost the
it
same
is
game.
no, not at all. Actually, it's perfectly linear. There's no room for, maybe there's a couple areas you can go and visit a different building. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's still linear. And that's fine. Um, Alan Wake also has a lot of notes that are dropped on the floor.
Hmm.
Um, quick, brief synopsis: Alan Wake is a writer, and he's trapped in some nightmare whereby he's writing the events of the game. So the pages you're finding on the ground are the pages of the story that he's writing, which are often referenced in the events of the actual game. So I like those notes in that case, A, because they're narrated, which is great, and B, they're short, and C, they actually are relevant to the plot that you're
Yeah.
playing right now,
Yeah,
which I
they
thought was
they
great.
Which
clearly use it to a different effect in that game.
which is sort of just like similar to Control is unscrupulous, unseen force, right? That's corrupting people and
Yeah, kind of.
But going back to your question about the open world, I think that it was used effectively here, like as a tool for storytelling. Because in Alan Wake, you say it's essentially on rails almost. It's you
Yeah, 100%.
follow the
But there's
narrative.
no problem with that.
Yeah, no, it's good for what it is, what they're trying to do with it, and that's why I think clearly this developer has experience making that kind of game. So why did they change it for this game? Well, because for me personally, at least, I imagine it's based on the story they're trying to tell and the character that you experience through. It's you're dropped into this world knowing nothing. Jessie, the main character, she shows up, finds the dead director, and is like, "Okay, I'm director now." Has all of this purpose shoved onto her without any knowledge of why or what's going on. And in a way, the maze-like open world adds to that sort of sense of what is happening here? What does any of this mean? Like you're as lost in a sense in the world as the character is in the whole experience. You aren't just following the story beats, you're wandering around trying to put things together, trying to discover things the same way the character is for the actual story. So in that sense, I think it actually is really well utilized. It kind of puts you in a similar position as the character might be.
I also think it'd just be very disappointing for world building if the oldest house was one corridor.
It's a lot of renovation done over the years.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. But,
Yeah, that's true.
I think also, actual gameplay wise, um, it can be frustrating sometimes. I think the map is not well made. I think the flat effect of the map in trying to illustrate a multi-leveled structure.
A very third dimensional
Yeah,
area.
it
Yeah.
is not effective. There's many times where I'm like, I don't know if like, I'm trying to get to this place. Where do I go?
Yeah. How do you get there?
And I think they intended the player to use the in-game signage a bit more frequently.
Yeah, that was 100%
Yeah.
their intention. Yeah. I think they've even said in interviews they wanted you to like explore.
Sure,
And
and
Which I thought was pretty good.
Yeah,
Like
I
if you're
could
looking at
see it,
something
yeah.
and then you see like a set of doors and a department head or top.
yeah,
Well, and you can even see that in the fact that there's no like direct waypoints on your
Hmm.
screen.
Yeah.
There's no compass,
Yeah,
which
so
I like actually.
yeah, so that is absolutely like a creative way to encourage exploration and like memorization of the levels.
Hmm.
Um,
That,
but when you do get lost, it
yeah.
does get really confusing because it's like there are lots of different areas all called different things, and you know you're probably trying to get to a specific place, but what if that's like two or three uh, areas in between?
Well, not only that, but the areas all look very much the
Oh,
same, which
Yeah.
fits the
similar,
setting and
yeah.
the tone of everything, but kind of falls flat a little more as kind of a semi-open world because often in open worlds you want to have very distinct different
It
areas.
makes them memorable.
Mm.
Yeah, but I
If
could
not
not
by the
really.
events, then the atmosphere and the environment.
Well, I have a question. Would you find the level design similar to a Metroidvania?
I've seen this game I've seen people call this game a Metroidvania. I would say it's like Metroidvania light, like
Yeah.
very light.
Yeah.
Like inspired in a way?
If you're going to do it at all, I think you have to put a huge asterisk.
Mm.
I think anything it does in a Metroidvania kind of style is not extremely special. Like there is backtracking sort of, but there aren't really
Rewards for
like
backtracking.
there are kind of like little hidden areas,
Mhm.
which is fine, but there isn't really much you can find. Which, if we're gonna talk about like loot and like stuff that you actually find in the game, I have a whole thing about that.
Yeah.
Well, what about in the sense of the actual structure of a level? A level being the different
So, well, one of the things in Metroidvania often is, even in Hollow Knight, we talked about recently. One of the things they do often is, they'll have shortcuts open up in a level so you can
loop around.
quickly
Yeah.
navigate back to
Mhm.
where you were, which they do in Control. I won't say that they don't, but I think they undermine this a bit by having so many warp points.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Often I would open a shortcut and I'd be like, well, I'm not going to use it, but
Yeah.
thanks. Which is not what you want. If you're going to design the level around like you need to make that shortcut feel like a breath of fresh air.
Sure. But I would also argue that with kind of the dullness of a lot of the areas, I don't really want to backtrack through them. I'd rather just warp to the closest area.
I agree,
Which, I
which is
mean,
why
you're totally right, is not great level design. I think that they stumbled and it accidentally worked in their favor.
Yeah, I think that they probably tried to make it a bit Metroid-like in terms of the structure of a level, using some similar uh, techniques in the design, but may have realized that you throw in a lot of waypoints because you realize a player might not want to walk through the level. Why don't they want to walk through? Is it because it's not enjoyable? Is there not enough engagement when you actually
Yeah.
do it? Is it confusing? Any of those, throw some waypoints in, some quick travel points, and the player will use that more often than just walking through.
Hmm.
And personally, I enjoy trying to walk through and avoid that if I can. But I did find frequently in Control that I'm trying to get somewhere and I have a sense of where it is, but it's like I know it's going to be trouble getting there. I know it's going to be confusing a lot of the time, and I know I'm going to be opening the map anyways. Why not get halfway there with a fast travel point and then
Yeah.
just get the
yeah.
rest? And that is all without mentioning the random encounters that
Yeah.
pop up as you explore.
Random game lengtheners that pop up like Pokemon battles
Yeah.
almost.
So,
Well, I'm somewhat of the opinion that they really should have dialed back a lot of the open world aspects of this game. I think honestly, if it was more linear, I think the story they could focus more on the actual narrative they're telling. They could focus more on the encounters, each one, and try and make each one more special. Not that they didn't have some interesting ones, but like you said, with random encounters when you're backtracking, it's like I don't I don't really need that. Like
I just feel like the biggest blip that would have made having a 3D world worthwhile is like the exploration in this game is kind of dog. Like most of the exploration is like you get a chest with like some confusingly named material like a astral blip or a confiscated motive. And then you collect all these and you totally lose thought of them because they're out of sight and you only ever check them whenever you go to see if you have the arbitrary requirements to upgrade your service weapon. I think if there were some hidden bosses and stuff you could find by exploring.
Well, I think those were all side quests related,
Yeah,
right?
They were
Like there
side
weren't
quests.
any
Well,
like just randomly hidden
true, but
bosses,
well,
right?
you'd have to activate the side quest. So my
right.
favorite
Yeah.
side quest in the game, and I think is what they could have done more of, is like the haunted fridge. Like, so
Yeah.
there's this
Yeah.
fridge
Yeah.
that like
That's a good one, yeah.
if you look away from it, like it attacks you or like does something devious, right? And I thought that's really cool. That's like, so that's like the opposite end to the like slightly gravitational Brahmin lantern and the sightseeing sink. It's like it actually feels like it has some merit in the world, and a cool event happens to it, and it leads to like a boss fight. I feel like if they did that all over the place, then the third person, sorry, the open world is totally warranted because you're looking for all these secret encounters and secret items that like are interesting to interact with.
Yeah.
Well, imagine for a moment that the fridge wasn't a side quest. It was just there. And you had to just go interact with it of your own volition, of your own curiosity. I think that would be way more
Well,
effective.
that's kind of how it starts, though, right? You show up and you see a character trapped in this holding cell with the object,
Yeah,
and so you initiate it. It's not like someone tells you, "Hey, go check out this fridge. There's a guy sitting there and he's stuck." Like
Well, they do
you.
actually. Like once you see the guy there, a side quest pops up on your screen, like new mission,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
investigate the fridge
Which
or
is why
whatever.
I wish, like he says, like, "Oh, don't forget about me,"
Yeah.
and like as you walk away, say, "Oh, I can't help you right now." And it's like I really wish they made you not forget about it.
Well, I'll be honest, I was really intrigued with that one in particular, so I didn't forget
As
about
soon
it.
as you
Well,
were
I
able,
didn't
yeah.
either. I went
Same,
right back
yeah.
to it because it again, like,
But
more
like if we're
noise.
gonna talk about the game being a Metroidvania, that should have been like tucked away in a corner, and then you find this guy staring at a fridge, and you're
I
like, "Oh
guess so.
damn!"
Well, I don't even think like the level design really lends itself to a Metroidvania either.
Yeah, I think
Like,
I think it's a
I don't
misguided
think. I
goal.
think also another thing that I think would improve it is if all the objects of power gave you some sort of power boost, like not necessarily like a unique skill, but like if you found them or whatever, they'd give you some sort of boost to like your gun recharge time or just like
Do they not
that.
all give you a special power? The
No, they
objects of power,
don't.
Well, the objects of power do.
the ones that you actually interact with.
Yeah, and there is a distinction, like the fridge, rubber duck, whatever the all minor things. They do classify it differently as a altered item.
Oh, right.
So any object of power in universe is described as an object that will only bind to
Right.
specific
Yeah, they
people.
bind to it.
And so
I think they should have made them all that.
I think that it would lessen the impact of. I mean, it's sort of a toss up between the structure of the world they're trying to build and
Yeah.
moment to moment gameplay, I guess.
Well, they're trying to make it make sense in the game world. Like, why does this floppy disk let you throw stuff around? Well, because this floppy disk is super special. Super
Yeah.
special.
Well, I mean, like the sink that takes you sightseeing. Why can't that like increase your zoom with one of your guns or something? I don't know.
Mm.
I mean, like I don't buy that. I don't think there's any reason that those couldn't have been objects of powers too. I don't think there has to be that delineation between altered items and objects of power.
Well, I think what it does is make the objects of power seem more significant.
I suppose so, but then my issue with that is you're through with those in the first 2 hours of the game.
Yeah, I think because what's the last one you got? The levitation?
Probably
Yeah.
that or the shield. I don't remember.
I
What.
think it's the
I think it's the
levitation. The
levitation, yeah.
shield is
Like a
yeah.
safe, I think.
Yeah, so you get the levitation about midway through the game, I'd say. So yeah, you're right, and in a way, it's sort of somewhat disappointing that you don't get more stuff throughout the rest of the game. But at the same time, it's like I guess maybe they don't want to overload the player with having to learn
You don't have to add. Well, that's what I mean. Like there could be like major ones that give
and
you
minor
whole
ones.
new
Yeah.
skills, and then minor like altered items could just
Mhm.
give you like a base stat boost that you don't have to equip to your slots, right?
Mm.
So actually, I think that would be a good idea as a way to add more rewards for exploration. I think
Mhm.
totally if they want to add in like some cool perks or something,
Yeah.
and they want to explain it away with an altered item, totally, that's cool. That's
Yeah.
better than finding like a box, your 100th box, which has a weapon mod that you don't have space for that you don't want. Like
yeah.
100%, I think
And
that
then
would
you
be a
go,
great.
oh, my mod inventory is full again.
Yeah. I mean, by the end, you're deleting anything that isn't a prime or an absolute mod, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Well, before we complain about the mods, I think we should talk about the actual moment to moment gameplay for a second,
Yeah.
like the
Yes.
game, the gunplay, the
Mhm.
shooting, and everything. So it is simple by modern standards. I mean, compared to something where like Alan Wake, where all you have is a flashlight and a pistol,
Hmm.
it's pretty impressive. I think, at least for me, it was pretty engaging. At least for the runtime of the game, like of the main story. I mean, as I started getting into the DLC, I was kind of thinking, well, I wish I had some more weapons. I wish
Mm.
I had something new to do. But I think for what it needed to do, it was serviceable. It was fun enough. Especially once you start like getting the levitation and the shield, and you have all kinds of like cool stuff you can do.
Yeah, so it's
I
it's
think it's pretty
basically a
fun.
mix of gunplay and telekinetic abilities, right? Like you kind of interplay them and mess
Yeah.
around with.
Well, when I was playing, it didn't really interplay. So there's there's a very limited enemy variety in the way you actually tackle them. Some of them are weaker to telekinetic abilities, and some you have to shoot the gun. So generally, when I played, I found the most effective way was throw things at people till you're out of energy, then shoot the gun till you have energy again, or vice versa, shoot the gun. When you run out, you throw things at people until your gun recharges. And those seem like the loops of the actual gameplay.
Mm.
Well, I
And
mean, they mix that up by having enemies that are able to dodge the throw,
Hmm.
enemies that are hard to hit with the gun, etc.
that's what I mean. So it's one or the other. You throw or you shoot the gun.
Well, I will say, so launch, the ability whereby you throw objects in the environment at enemies, which
Feels pretty good actually. I
it
must
feels
say, it
really
Yeah.
feels
nice.
good.
It's
Makes a
really
good
satisfying.
sound.
It's really satisfying. It's super cool how it'll like just pull the stone of the walls
Yeah.
out if there's
Yeah,
nothing
when the
else to
floor
grab.
comes up. Yeah,
Yeah.
Or
it's
how
great.
it'll just grab anything on the screen. It'll grab
Yeah.
like a camera or
So
like
it's
it'll grab a
funny. I did
desk or
notice that they made it so you can target items. Whatever's in your crosshair. If you use the launch ability, it'll grab that.
yeah.
In a way that they're like, if you grab something that's behind an enemy, it'll hit them on the way to
Hmm.
you. Or if you let go of the launch ability as it's coming to you, it will launch from that
Yeah,
position. So they tried to make it be like, oh, like, be strategic about how you're using this ability. And, it eventually just becomes like just launch stuff. You're
It's
not really.
almost too easy to use. Like
Hmm.
it's very intuitive. It's like a great
Absolutely. Yeah.
system, and the first few times you use it, you're like, "Wow, this is
Yeah.
crazy." And for me, it was like that because, like, if I compare it to like the closest mechanic I can think of is the Force in the Star Wars Force Unleashed, whereby you can obviously pick up objects and enemies and throw them. But in that, it's like you have to press a button and then like flick the right stick like in
yeah.
whatever direction. It's a little more like mechanical and more to think about. So the launch, by comparison, is just like you just go,
Yeah.
you
It's a
just hit
lot
it
more
and you do it.
realized than almost any other telekinetic system
Yeah.
in most games.
That being said, it is I think a little too simple. Like the things you just mentioned, Evan, like picking up objects behind enemies to pull it through them and so on, is about as far as skill expression and creativity
And
with that
it's more
ability
just like a
goes.
bonus when it
Yeah,
happens.
because that's not, in the middle of a firefight, that's not something you're really looking for.
No,
If it happens, it's cool.
it's very cool.
It happens sometimes,
Yeah.
but at no point am I sitting there like actively thinking about doing that.
Mhm.
I saw a clip, I think probably from like pre-release footage of Control, where they show the character launching an object perpendicular to the character, as in like left to right on the screen.
Mm,
And when I saw that, I was like, that looks awesome. I wish I could do that. And that's kind of what the Force Unleashed Star Wars was able to do. It turns out it's kind of a tricky thing to manipulate 3D objects in space.
turns out,
Oh
yeah.
Yeah,
yeah.
it like with depth and stuff. So I can see why they went for like a more streamlined like approach with the launch ability.
Well, I have to say, like, I enjoyed
Yeah, it's fun.
the telekinesis and gunplay for what it was. Like, I think that this game could have easily devolved into a cover shooter. Um, you know, if given different enemy behaviors and uh, varieties, and why use the telekinesis and the levitate if you could just hide behind something, not take damage, and fire back when you have your ammo refilled.
Well, I mean, if you play on the regular difficulty, it's kind of what you do anyways.
Well,
Like,
there's
There's no
no
difficulty
difficulty
setting.
settings.
is there not? Oh,
No,
there's like
yeah.
this whole thing that was like you could turn on aim assist, and there's like this
Yeah, there are
whole
options to make it
menu
a
of
bit
like bitch
easier.
mode
Yeah.
stuff. But I found myself just like right hand ruling, where you essentially put yourself behind a pillar that, because of the way your cursor faces, you still shoot around the wall, but enemies can't hit you.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So it's like against some annoying enemies, like I still played
cheesed it a bit.
almost like it was a cover shooter. Yeah.
Well, I didn't find I did that through my playthrough. I found that there's a few enemy varieties, especially what were they? The floating, the hiss charged, I think they were called.
Yeah.
Probably. I
Yeah,
cannot
they're
remember.
floating enemies
Yeah.
that are essentially like moving bombs. As soon as they get to you, they'll detonate, and they just sort of beeline to you the whole fight.
Mhm.
So that kind of forces you, as long as you're being overwhelmed by other stuff too, to constantly be moving. Once you get the levitate ability and get a hang of it, it does add a lot of options in terms of that, where you can.
I swear the levitate ability makes guys stop shooting at you. Because you'll be walking around on the ground getting like filled up like a pencil. And then you start levitating, and guys just like, oh, that's neat.
I mean, hey,
What's
if
that
you're
over
shooting
there?
at someone and someone starts levitating, it might take you a second to like reorient here, but I
Yeah.
find the opposite, where you maybe the first couple seconds you get a little space, but as soon as you're out there for an extended period of time, you just get lit up from every
Yeah.
direction.
Well, and that's why when I got that, I'm like, okay, so this will help for parry traversal, but I feel like I can't use this in combat.
Well, eventually I ended up, you mix it with the dash ability, and it
Yeah.
lets you get from spot to spot and get around
Mhm.
the environment to sort of flank enemies. But yeah, my point was that I actually enjoyed the mix of gunplay and telekinetic abilities. I thought that the way the enemies were designed and the encounters were designed was generally in a way that allowed you to take advantage of both.
Maybe. I honestly think the game tries to make you think there's way more enemy varieties than there are. Like there's files
Yeah.
on like 25 different enemy types, and I swear there's like 4.
Yeah,
There is basically, yeah.
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 Yeah, you've got your infantry guy, and then you've got a few
Infantry
guys that can
V2,
float.
infantry that shoots a rocket, infantry that has a
Yeah.
sniper, which is actually that one's a little bit different, but
Yeah, I think one of actually the best enemy types in the game was the hiss distorted, which
Big
is
big props for doing your homework
Oh,
on the
yeah,
actual
yeah, you
enemy
could
names
tell,
here, because
huh?
I couldn't tell you a single enemy name.
Uh-uh.
But so hiss distorted is the one enemy where you're in the maintenance sector.
Is it the invisible one?
It's the invisible one.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So that as
That's a
an
cool one.
yeah, as your initial encounter, especially the
Yeah.
first time you see it, it's like this tense, like atmospheric, like what the hell is
It's like a hide and
happening?
seek too.
Yeah, and yeah, you have to use your telekinetic abilities. You have to run around. You have to use gunplay once you get the thing revealed and staggered. It was a really well done enemy, and the design even really interesting. It's sort of this bird thing.
It's not clear. It's not clear what.
Unclear. Seems bird like.
Has wings.
Super well done design.
Yeah, but the point is, it gets across this sort of feeling of this really substantial enemy.
Sure.
And as a lot of games do, once you sort of beat this mini boss, it'll show up in other random encounters.
Yeah.
And so that enemy in particular, I think, is one of the top in the game. But you're right.
Could be the top. And
Yeah.
I wish you saw more of that, because I think you only fight like 3 times in the whole game.
Yeah, there's not many encounters with it. Most of the time, you're not facing those ones. But
Or just like bosses in general. I think the game could have dealt with, like, even if the bosses were sort of rudimentary from like other bosses, like I think that'd be fine. Just like put in more cool boss fights. Like if you're trying to build a world, make there be more cool beings in it.
yeah, they do rely a bit too much on just wave clearing fights, I think.
Like the former was a cool one because that actually had like
Well, speaking of doing your homework,
actually-
okay, knew what it was called.
actually good. Well, it's the fridge. It's like the one part of the game I enjoy.
Yeah.
It's it has like a huge story implication or like world implication with the board, which is sort of like the ruler of the oldest house, I guess, which was cool. It's like, okay, so where's more of this, right?
Yeah,
Why
and
isn't there more of that?
even the design of that creature, it's like unique. There's nothing else like it in the entire
Yeah,
game.
and then the so it's a separated combat area from the world. It's in like an arena that you go into.
Yeah, once you get sucked into the fridge.
Yeah, but then like it's a thing with an eye that shoots like little explodey balls at you, and then after you shoot enough in its obvious weak point, it gets out like these giant like mandibles, and it starts to try to hit you with them, and it blows holes in the
Holes,
floor
yeah.
open, which is a great thing. Well,
Once you
it's
realize
good and
3
bad.
times after you've died that it's
Well,
creating
okay,
new
so
holes
it's
and
a
you're not
frust-
just flying off the edge. Yeah.
It's a frustrating fight because you're trying to look up at this thing constantly because it's shooting projectiles at you, but there's also random holes in the floor which you never look at or want to look at during the fight. But I think the mechanics in the fight had potential. I think that as a boss was like again one of a couple of actually fun enemy variants to fight. And I just
Yeah.
think that if they did more of those bigger encounters with story implications,
Well, it's
I would
funny
have been a
you
lot happier.
mentioned wanting more of that because they do it twice. And I think
Oh,
that
three whole bosses?
no. They do the former fight twice,
Oh,
which I think lets down the initial encounter a bit because it's
yeah.
like you see it and it's like, holy crap, that was so cool. This is such a unique thing. Like you want more of that, but
It's
not
so funny
more
because
of
Not
that.
literally
you're
that,
talking
yeah.
about how the like one of the tenets of new weird is like leaving things unexplained.
Yeah.
And then the one thing that like I enjoy and like could lead to mystery they revisit.
Yeah,
It's like,
so
come on.
and they do it in kind of a cheap way where there's another altered item, flamingo, which has a really weird like lead up to it, which I didn't even know how you actually got through. I think I just did by accident.
Which one is that?
It's the flamingo. You're doing the quest to for Langston.
Yeah, you gotta secure all the
Yeah, and it's
altered items, yeah.
it sort of goes down this hallway, but then the hallway starts getting real trippy and like triangle-y and
Yeah.
hexagon-y and spinning around. If you try and get through, you just get sent back to the beginning for whatever reason.
Yeah, I have no idea. I don't recall.
Yeah, okay. So basically, it's another altered item, and you get to it, and then you just fight the former again. You know, it's
yeah.
it felt cheap, like they realized they had this really cool fight and wanted to use it again.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk more about the actual design of the enemies. Like the former is really interesting. I mean, the anchor fight
Yeah.
is something unique. I mean, it's
If
Again,
not
it's
really
like it's one
easy.
of three bosses that kind of is different from the base gameplay.
But when I started the game and I was like in the first hour and I'm like, oh, okay, they're doing like an SCP thing. You know, there's all kinds of like weird, like possessed objects. I was expecting like some
weird
wild
shit.
enemies.
Yeah.
And to see that most of the enemies are basically humanoids with a few
Little
variations
red
was
glowy bits.
a little disappointing. Man, give me like a mech made out of desks or something. You know what I
Seriously,
mean?
yeah.
Like give me some weird
Something
shit to fight.
exciting. Yeah.
Just give me some weird shit. That's all I want to see. And so I was a little let down on that front. Because the sky's the limit with this
Yeah.
genre.
Well, if you
know
go
what I mean?
like if you go and you actually read stuff on like the SCP wiki or stuff like that, like there's some kooky stuff going on.
Totally wild.
Yeah.
So like
Yeah,
if they
no.
do
More
make
like some actually spooky stuff, which I think that the game could have done enough. Like I guess they didn't want to just revert to Alan Wake, which has obviously a much more haunted kind of style than Control does. But
yeah.
I think that that sort of atmosphere lends itself more to SCP than Controls.
You know,
I mean, in
totally
Alan Wake
agree.
they have like poltergeists, so like possessed objects that like fly at you.
Yeah.
It's like all kinds of weird stuff, like a train engine and like rope wheels, like
Just walk into a room and a train flies at your
Yeah,
face.
literally. And that's weird and it's like interesting for me. So I would have
Yeah.
liked to see a lot more of that.
Yeah, no, I was definitely let down a bit too because it's like, especially eventually, sort of late game, you start learning about the altered or the object power that gave Jesse and her brother Dylan their freaky abilities. Was a slide projector with something like 9 slides, and each slide had a different dimension and weird thing associated with it.
Yep.
And so they describe it in detail through a lot of the side notes and whatnot. And there's a few that they name particularly that sounded really interesting. And as I'm playing, I'm like, wow, like I hope that comes through and I get to start like, jump into these different slides, like change up the environment a bit, give unique interactions and enemy types. So yeah, I mean, there were 3 in particular. The Not Mother,
Yeah.
which they, Jesus,
Nightmare
that
stuff.
sounds creepy in and of itself. Dog Neil.
Classic dog Neil.
Yeah, which is described as their friend Neil, who was turned into a dog, but it's not really a dog, kind of like a melting dog. That sounds crazy and ridiculous and interesting and terrifying, and you want to see it in game.
For sure.
And then, of course, the dung monkeys.
Classic.
Yeah, again, like, they clearly have these ideas for really interesting characters and story, but maybe they were limited to what they could actually develop in a game.
But
Well,
then,
so I think that stuff that you're talking about specifically, that was like a very clear choice to not show that stuff.
Mm.
As interesting as it is, I think one of the hallmarks of any good SCP file
Is not being able to
is
see.
not knowing what the
Yeah.
heck it is, truly.
And I think that works in SCP, but in a game,
Yeah.
you know, you're like, wow, I want to experience that.
100%.
Even if it's not explained, like you still want to experience it.
Yeah.
You know?
or even they could have taken a chance to do it with DLC, but instead you go to an equally boring environment
Mm.
in the Foundation.
Yeah, so I think that it's funny too, because talking about the slides, they eventually say, almost in a sense of they knew people would want to experience it, and they didn't want to have people like continue to assume that they would. And it's like, oh yeah, by the way, all the slides got destroyed except for 2, which
Oh, rats.
yeah, developed that the hiss came from.
Darn, guys,
and,
because I can't show you them. They
yeah.
were really cool, I promise.
Yeah, exactly.
But hey, you know, they could just come up with a reason. Oh, the slide recreated all the old slides.
Yeah.
They definitely
It does. It do that
They-
sometimes.
They pull that kind of stuff all the time.
They
as
could.
well,
They could
so-
100% bring it back if they
Yeah.
wanted. Which
I hope they do, honestly.
I think that just quickly, that's one of my favorite parts of this like genre is how literally the sky's the limit. You could write anything.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Well, it's not anything, but you know, you can really push the limits of
Yeah.
what any rational story
Yeah.
would explore.
What's funny, I wanted to go back just briefly to the anchor encounter that you mentioned, because it is one of the few absolutely unique encounters. Yeah. And you walk in, and it's like, oh my god, like this is about to be insane. Like, how are you gonna fight this thing? Turns out you just whip clocks at it like 4 times and it dies. Like, it's not complex, it's not difficult. You just wait for it to go in a circle once and throw a clock at it before it uses its attack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think once again, it's like a really, really, really interesting thing that wasn't quite used to the best that it could have been.
Yeah.
I think that's fair. All right. Well, I mean, from there, maybe to bring it back to a lighter note and talk about the service weapon for a second, which is the main weapon in the game that you use. The presentation of it, I love it. I think it's really cool.
Yeah.
I think it's like a cool idea
Yeah.
for the universe. Like, you pick up the gun, you're the director now. And the gun transforms, it can do all kinds of crazy stuff, which is cool. Biggest problem with the gun. And I mean, this is like a problem. I don't know how they didn't think of this, but you need to be able to change your gun to any other mode in the middle of the fight. Just bring up a radial menu.
Oh,
So I do not want to stop the fight, go through the menu, pick which new gun I want to pick.
Well, it's
The
funny.
literal wheel has been invented. They're just unaware of it.
It's been done 100 times.
Yeah.
It's
already,
funny you
right?
say that, and I agree that it would have been better than what they have now. But I also only used 2 guns the whole game. Maybe I'd change it up once.
But you know why? It's because it was a pain in the ass to open the
well,
menu.
no, why? Because I didn't because like 3 of the 6 guns just feel like crap to use.
Yeah. And hurling chunks of floor at people is pretty
Easy.
effective.
Yeah. Yeah, because I
But
think
there
I
are
used-
certain enemies that I would like to switch my weapon. Like, I don't want to have Pierce active all the time, but if there's one of these flying dickheads,
I don't want Pierce
It was
active ever.
essentially Pierce or shotgun for me.
if there's one of these flying dickheads that's going to dodge all my hurled bits of concrete, I'm going to need that. But I don't want to stop the game.
Yeah.
Well,
I thought it was a big mispoint because, like, I thought the way, even just in its regular handgun mode, it sounded good to use for the first little while, and some of the guns felt good to use. But then, for example, spin is useless because it's super inaccurate and runs out of ammo almost
Kidding me?
instantly.
I will say, you're talking about using Shatter and Pierce most of the time. You talking about Pierce. The 2 guns I kept on the whole time was Grip and Spin.
Spin sucks, dude.
No, I
Spin,
maxed it.
spin is only good at level 3.
No, I maxed it out. Well, yeah, I maxed it out.
Yeah, level 1 is terrible.
But mostly because, you know, it's one of the few that can do range, but isn't the god awful Pierce.
I think Pierce is great.
I hated
Pierce is
that
the
gun.
only thing that could even slightly match Throw's damage output.
No,
Well, it was also
Grip
something
leveled
that
up
was
crazy.
actually. Well, what I liked about it was actually situational. There were certain enemies that it was very good against, and a lot that it wasn't.
Which
very
is
good against.
clearly the intention, that you
Yeah, for
change up the
sure.
gun depending on the encounter you're in.
Well, I've listening to interviews with the developers, they're like, they are often talking about how they wanted to have the player like customize the experience or like customize their character to play the way they want to, like
Mhm.
with the mods and all that stuff. So that's what they wanted, but like it's just for me, it's such a huge misstep
Yeah.
to not have like just a wheel so that pauses the game
Yeah,
quickly.
there's
I don't
probably
know if
no
Just
that's
hold
excuse
square,
for
just
that.
hold square, brings up a wheel.
yeah. Even if like the game goes into slow mo for the minute.
Sure,
Yeah.
whatever.
I mean, look, I'm used to like pulling over the menu and reading things. Like that's not going to be a
Yeah.
game breaking halt.
No, it would be a huge improvement to the game flow.
To add a wheel for the notes.
There you go. Boom, solved.
There you
I
go.
also just think, and one of the reasons I never used the spin was it was so frustrating to like get the machine gun and then realize you could only fire it for like 2 seconds and you had to wait 3 seconds to reload it. It's like that is
Well,
not fun to fire at all.
I didn't find that though. I really did find when I was using spin, maybe it was on the perks that I had for it.
You also said you turn on aim assist, which might be a thing,
I didn't turn it on. I never turned it on. I left it how it was when I started.
which is off.
Was it off to start?
Probably. It's pretty hard to aim in that game sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I
which they
turned it
claim
on,
is-
but
They give you disclaimers like, it's supposed to be a difficult game. That's why.
We should also quickly say we're all playing on PS4, so
yeah, no PC mouse.
this
and
was
keyboard here.
controller controls. Yeah.
Maybe it's the game. It starts when it's one of those games that starts up and it gives you options at the beginning. Like, do you want to do this? Yes, no.
Oh,
Next,
maybe.
do you want to do this? Next, yes, no, next. So maybe in that case, I turn because there is different severities, if you will, of like
Yeah.
aim assist. And I know that I didn't have mine on like very severe, but more so like, it sort of pushes a direction. So, it's as I'm playing, it's very easy to get off a target, but it still probably is a bit easier than how you were dealing with
Well, I
it.
mean, the intended way that the intended way that they want you to play the game, spin is useless. Makes no stick. Can't like actually hit anything. You waste your ammo in 2 seconds, and then you're like, oh well, I don't even know why I stopped throwing pizza floor at people.
Well, guess you should have played the better way then.
Okay, well, here's a question that we haven't really talked about. How do we feel about the amount and the content of the actual loot that you find in the game? Let's get into it.
Blows. I think I already touched on this out of the chest. Like,
A
there's
little,
way too
yeah.
many chests everywhere. They give you things that like, oh, they have cool names, but then there's like 15 different types of things, and like you might need 2 of them for one random weapon upgrade. And like like at a point, I just didn't pay attention to it. I got back to like the control points, and they're just like, well, I hope I picked up these random things to upgrade my guns.
Yeah, no, I'll agree that I never really like paid attention to what I was picking up. And every now and then I check to see if I can just upgrade my gun.
Yeah,
And I
like-
could or I couldn't, and that
And
was it.
but that's the thing is like when you couldn't, it wasn't like, oh, I need to go find more like
Yeah, kill
house
these
memories.
guys to get that and whatever.
That's never what I thought. It's like, oh, I don't have enough stuff. I'll just
Yeah.
wait to find more stupid chests.
I will say one way I could see that being improved would be because actually, like, we kind of mentioned how there's way too many like weapon upgrades. Like you end up like getting full
Like
up.
the mods.
Yeah, the
Mhm.
mods. I feel like it would have made them feel a bit more significant and maybe get rid of like the 1 and 2 tier mods in the first place. Only put the mods in those chests that you find around the world and just let the other materials drop from enemies because the enemies drop materials and mods,
Yeah.
which is why you fill up on the mods so often, mostly with ones that you're never going to use anyways. So, in that sense, you give the mods a bit more substance, a bit more rarity. So you're actually looking for
Yeah.
these things. And you never feel like you're really short on materials, hopefully, because since enemies aren't dropping mods, they'll drop more materials. So, maybe there's a solution for making the materials a bit more memorable so that you know what you need to do to get them.
Well, I have a couple solutions I think that would really improve the system as it is. Well, one as it is and one for just changing it. First thing is just allow the player to carry more mods. I think there is just no reason that the mod inventory is so low. I don't know. It's a weird choice for
Yeah.
me. The other thing that I think would be great for this kind of like RPG light thing that they're going for is to allow you to upgrade your character to have more mod slots, upgrade your guns to have more mod slots,
Yeah.
which they do to 1, 2, 3 for your character and for the guns. But like, I think take it further than that because if you really want to custom, like let the player customize how they're playing, I found that just 3 for each was not really enough.
Yeah.
Well, I could
And
imagine.
also make them a little bit more impactful. Like I felt
Make
like a
them more
lot of the things were
substantial.
so like minor that I don't even know why I bothered with them.
Well, and the other thing is, I like your suggestion, Evan, to like take them off the enemy's like loot pool. The other thing that I'd really like them to do is just make them unique items because the way it is right now is they're random draw, which I don't see the point of. I think if you really want to embrace like this Metroidvania like style, make them like unique drops. So like each chest, you've decided what is in each one. You can have the upgrades and you can have
Well, that's
like
kind of that's a
chests later
hallmark
on.
of
Yeah.
Metroidvania is the things you find are relevant and
It
will change the game.
incentivizes some exploration, right?
And like if we remember Hollow Knight, it's like you can find, charms. And like
Mhm.
each one is different. Each one has been placed particularly in the world. And I would have liked to see that
Yeah,
more so in
yeah.
this
I
game.
think you mentioned like if the developers wanted you to play how you wanted to, expand the number of mods you can use, and I can imagine why they didn't, and so that you need to make like active choices of what's best. What do you think is best in the moment? So that is not a defense of the rest of it, like the excessive amounts of generic mods and stuff.
Well, I'm sure it happened with all of you. Like, even 5, 6 hours in, you open a chest and you're like, well, I'm not even gonna look at what that
Yeah,
mod is because I'm
yeah,
already full. I don't even care. And come on, it's a chest. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We should be opening chests, be like, ooh, I can't wait to
Yeah, I
see
can't
what's
wait to
in
see what
here.
I
and some of
find.
those chests are very well like just hidden in the
Pretty
environment.
well hidden
Yeah.
and not a great reward.
Yeah.
They're like there's some spots that's like, oh wow, I can't believe I actually got over here and
Yeah.
oh great, there's a chest. Nice.
And it's funny, there's a few moments in the game where, once you get the levitate, you can get to a lot of areas, right? And you'll get a little pop up once you go like, oh, I wonder if I can get over there.
Yeah,
Like, I wonder
yeah.
what's over there, and then you get a little pop up like, oh, you've discovered a hidden area. Okay, and
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, that's cool, but there's nothing here, like.
You know what's one funny thought I had about the chests? After I open them, I leave so fast that I don't actually pick up the things that are in the chest sometimes. Like that is how bad I want to get the hell out of Dodge after walking over to the chest.
I think like even if they change that, it would actually make the game feel a lot more satisfying to
Yeah.
play. It would make those discoveries feel more
And
Like
impactful.
you're actually discovering
Yeah,
something.
and the choice of then what to use with a limited
Absolutely.
loadout. Now, one thing I also wanted to talk about, just in terms of the gameplay, is the healing system, because I actually think it's interestingly done. Like it's slightly different than what you'd get in most, shooters, action shooters.
In that you don't just regenerate
Yeah,
health.
it's you're not just regenerating health, but it's also not an item based regeneration system
Yeah.
where you have to actively stop what you're doing and take out a
It's not like
healing
consumables.
bot.
or
Yeah,
anything,
exactly.
It's more like a Zelda kind of thing where kill an enemy, there's health on the ground.
Kind of, yeah. But I feel like the way Control that it does it is exciting. Like it's really intuitive. It's not fully passive. You don't get to just forget about it because the way the health system works, I should mention, is that as you kill enemies or as you shoot enemies, they will drop sort of healing nodes.
Kool-Aid crystals.
Kool-Aid crystals, yeah. So there'll be little like particles on the ground, and as you move over them, you will pick them up, and it will regenerate your health. And not excessively either. Like you get minor additions to your health for each piece you pick up. So I think the reason I find it interesting is that it incentivizes you to continue moving in a fight.
In a way, like
because you
it-
can't just hide behind cover and wait for the health to respawn, to
true.
regen.
So this is my issues because if you massacre a bunch of people and you're low health, now oh crap, now I have to make a mad dash to the health.
But
Or
it
if,
makes
like,
it
you're fighting
it
guys,
exciting, It's like, oh shit, now I have to make this mad
or it's
dash.
annoying. Like okay, now I make this mad dash, and if I don't make it, I just die. Because like
But-
sometimes you'll be fighting some stuff, something will come up behind you, take your whole health, and you're like, oh crap, where was that pile of Kool-Aid?
But at the same time, it adds some strategy to a fight where it's like, okay, this is a huge wave of enemies, or there's one enemy that's really, that can get your butt at any moment.
Yeah, because they all
Um,
can.
yeah, and so it's like, okay, I don't want to just shoot them all from across the room because if I do need health, then yeah, then I'm gonna have to get across the room to get any
I
of
had
it.
the opposite approach. I was just like, I'm just gonna right hand rule these guys. Fuck them.
So I think it isn't. It's a different way of doing a healing system where I think it was worth doing it this way
Mhm.
because it isn't as boring as a passive healing and it isn't as frustrating as needing to use consumables. It
Well,
incentivizes movement and combat
I
and a
think what
bit
they
more
should have
strategy.
done is something similar to like how Horizon Zero Dawn does healing. Like let you store like a little bit of it, and then in order to regen health, all you have to do is press like I think it was like right on the D-pad, and you'd heal. And like as long as you held it, you would heal more, and it would drain your supply of healing. Because
Hmm.
there'd be a lot of times it was like, okay, I'm bathing in Kool-Aid right now, and
But
then
you don't need it.
you don't need it, and then
Yeah.
you go to some other area, and you're like, well, fuck, I wish I had Kool-Aid.
But that's the thing, I think, is that it makes it more strategic because you can't just heal whenever you want to. You
Well,
need to sort of consider when it's available, how to get it available. If you're
I mean, I guess, but maybe my brain's too peanut. But I mean, I'm just trying to shoot people and throw
you're just trying
floor.
to shoot people and have a good time over here.
Aren't we all? Um, well, it's interesting you say that because I was always thinking of Horizon Zero Dawn as well. You bring up something interesting. I always consider Horizon Zero Dawn to be one of my least favorite healing systems. Reason being, I don't like having to go scrounge around the
Yeah, no,
world to
scrounging in
build
it
up
kind of sucks.
like element. But you do raise an interesting point. Like, what if the crystals you find on the ground could be stored for later?
Yeah,
Mm.
And that was just a passive thing. You just run over and
Well,
it's
then my
stored.
counterpoint then is it defeats the purpose of presumably them wanting you to get up and move and be active in fights. Because
Yeah,
if
I
you can
think
store it,
you're.
then you just sit there, heal, and start going again. So I can see why they chose to do it this way.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, you're right. It was like a focus on movement, and it does create some interesting moments. But I
Especially
think
because they
for
give you a lot of
me,
options too, right? Like in movement, like you can use the shield and the dash and the levitate.
in the ground
Yeah,
slam,
yeah.
so you have a lot of options to traverse things quickly and in some amount of cover as you do it, depending on how well you've leveled up the shield. But
I just like I think the way it usually turned out for me was okay. If I make it through this fight, I can get back to full health. It just never turned like sometimes I'd run over and find health, but like if there's like a cluster of guys and you're killing them off because they're not actually moving in on you, it's like, well, I'm not just going to dash over there because that's where all the other guys are.
mm,
And then it's just like, well, now I've got to finish this fight, and then by the end of the fight, there's enough healing to get me back to full health. It's not like I'm worried about healing midway through sometimes because you just can't.
yeah, and maybe it depends on the enemies you're facing in the
It's a lot
moment.
about
Like,
the enemy types,
yeah,
like the floating guys. Like it works great
yeah,
because
because
you're
they're
already running away from them, and
exactly
like that works well. But for a lot of
the rangers
the
and
static
stuff.
projectile enemies,
Yeah,
like they'll just cluster up and okay, and especially when there's like one of the big juggernaut guys, it's like okay, so he's got the bank on the Kool-Aid right
well,
now.
that's when you just keep whipping pebbles at him every 30 seconds, so he just keeps staggering.
well, the enemies you're talking about, the ones that will just laser you, like the troopers, the rangers, whatever. I think they are actually kind of problematic in this system because they just have like hit scan
Mm,
and they just kind of like laser you if you're in the open.
Yeah,
It kind of goes counter to this
movement
system where you
idea.
want to, make a mad
mhm.
dash to grab some healing because you don't know if you're just going to walk out behind cover and just get instantly
Yeah.
lasered,
Well, I
which
mean,
is something that
and
happens.
the dash works well. Maybe this is just like an energy management thing. But like if you ever like run out of dashes, you're cooked.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's definitely I'd assume the intended way of
No,
doing
I
it.
agree. But then it's like, okay, now I've got no movement for
Yeah.
checking my watch.
Yeah, so again, it brings up the having to think about a combat encounter a bit more strategically than just reacting moment to moment.
Maybe, but like the combat's not interesting enough for me to want to look at it like chess.
Well, not so much that you're sitting there like planning out your moves, but like, oh, I know I have this much energy. I know that I want to do this. How do I do
I wait.
it?
I wait. That's what I do.
I think, yeah, I don't see the game that way, like at all. For me, I see Hiss spawning in. All right, I'm just gonna start levitating. I'm
Clack,
gonna
clack,
pick
clack,
up a
clack.
rock. You know what I mean? I'm gonna start swinging. I
Yeah.
don't think
Hopefully this random object I picked up will explode when I throw it.
Yeah,
Yeah, that nice little surprise when you see the explosion
It's
when
like,
an
oh,
object.
sweet.
yeah. I didn't know forklifts could do that. That's exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, last thing I kind of want to talk about in terms of the gameplay and kind of just about the atmosphere as well is from the beginning, there's a lot of tension in the game. You know, it's not quite a horror game. You know, you're not walking around scared of things most of the time, mirror dimension aside. Um, but there's tension. You know, it's this sort of mix of not knowing what these paranormal, paranatural, supernatural enemies are going to be and what their abilities are. Eventually, you'll figure out that a lot of them are kind of mundane,
Yeah.
but
At the start, things are just generally kind of
yeah.
unsettling.
And they do carry that through the end, I think. You know, there are still moments up until the end where it's like this is kind of uncomfortable. You know, you're tense but not stressed.
And I
And
think that might play in well for you because you were enjoying the game. But for me, at some points, I feel like
you're
you were
just
ruined because
frustrated.
I was bored.
Yeah.
I was bored, and I think if I approached those moments that could have been good,
Mm,
they're already ruined for me because my mood is just like,
mm.
come on, please just give me something.
I guess. Did you do the mirror side
Yeah,
quest?
pretty sure.
Yeah, so that was I think a standout for me up until the end. I was let down by the final fight in that side mission there, but you know, I thought that was a really good example of how they build tension in the game
Yeah,
because
and how a lot of the other areas should have been like, I mean, not the same, but like
hmm,
tried to explore similar like gameplay paths or just like, sorry, not gameplay paths, but like environments.
I guess, but I think in a way that I'm glad it wasn't all like that because that was sort of the higher end of tension.
Yeah, and I guess you kind of have to have a spectrum of it for
Yeah,
it to be effective.
yeah, exactly. So, you know, for people who don't know, in this mission, you discover an altered item, a mirror, and on the other side of this mirror, it's like a somewhat, uh,
It's a mirror dimension.
yeah, it's a somewhat accurate reflection of the world on the other side. And you get through, and I thought one really interesting thing they did with it was the mirrored speech.
Yeah.
So that you find an audio log, and while you stand there listening to it for 2 minutes, you know, it's you listen to a scout who went through and a researcher interviewing him post mission, and the scout's speaking backwards, so it's like gibberish. You have no idea what they're saying, and the researcher's completely like, "Oh, that's nice, honey." Like that's
The subject is
yeah,
still fucked in the
yeah.
head.
And then you get through, and you know it's a mirrored world, so that recording is still there. So you listen to it, except the researcher is reversed this time, and you hear what the scout was saying, and it's all about this. You know, there's some creature in there, like don't go in there, shut it down, like, and you're like, oh geez, like what have I gotten myself
Yeah.
into here? And you get in, and it's this one room with a lot of mannequins, which you know were creepy in the first place.
Yeah, just in general.
Yeah, so you get in, it's kind of creepy, and it's kind of tense. There's not much to explore, but eventually you end up fighting the creature, which was described. And as a lot of encounters, it was kind of underwhelming.
What, when you fight a sedge?
Yeah, so you basically fight yourself. This creature is a mirror of yourself with the same abilities, but it's that same idea, you know? It's like you go in, they could do anything. They could throw a train engine at you. And all
Yeah.
they did was another humanoid version of you. And I kind of like that, you know, the Dark Link fight, you know, it's you're fighting something that has the same abilities as you.
Yeah.
How do you deal with it? But it's like,
Yeah, I mean, I didn't hate that
yeah,
from
but
like a
break it up
conceptual
with something,
standpoint.
you know? It's like this creature is some otherworldly being, you know? It tried your fight style and your moves. Throw some tentacles out there, you know, like explode
Give me
into some
turn
like,
into a desk.
yeah, explode into some kind
Yeah.
of like
Oh, to hell with this.
space being like horror entity, you know?
I agree.
And that's what I was excited for and tense about. And then you get there and it's not.
Yeah.
But that's aside from the point. The point was that I like how the game does build tension without being a horror game.
Okay, that's interesting. I think the more I think about it, the stranger I think it is that this game is like an action shooter.
Yeah.
It really seems like this genre lends itself a lot more to more like a survival horror, like an Alan Wake kind
Or
of
like
thing.
a walking simulator.
Or
would be
Resident
better.
Evil.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, obviously that's been done already, so I guess they were trying to do something different.
Hmm.
For me, a lot of the tension was shattered just because like Jesse's really strong. You know what I mean? She's very powerful. You feel powerful. You have all these different weapons and like abilities.
Well, that's a really good point, and I thought one enemy type that really took advantage of that, which you don't see all that often throughout the game. You do a few times, but it's the astral spikes.
Okay, right?
So these are enemies in quotes, I guess, but beings in this game that aren't controlled by the big bad hiss. They are something separate from the antagonist, and you cannot kill them. You can kind of stagger them for a minute if you throw things at them.
Would you want to describe what an astral spike is?
Uh, okay, well, okay, listener, picture in your head. There's this black ball. It's just like a black hole, except there's just things pulsing from like every direction. And it's kind of like there's no real way of explaining it well. It's the thing.
That sounds a lot cooler than what it actually is.
Well,
I always thought of it as like a pulsating cube, kind
Yeah,
of.
let's say it's like glitching out.
yeah, it's like picture like audio like wavelengths or something. Like it's that, but in a 3D sphere. Like it's this vibrating, pulsating, spiky circle.
Sure,
Yeah.
let's go with that. Vibrating, pulsating, spiky
There you
circle.
go. So, as intimidating as that does sound, basically, if you get into an environment with these astral spikes present, they just beeline for you. As soon as you get into their sort of radius of influence, they just go for
Hunt you
you.
down.
Yeah, and you can't fight them. They'll kill you fairly quickly once they get to you. You'll always have a chance to fight back, though, at least to stagger them to get away.
Yeah.
But
Sounds like a great enemy type. Now, picture this. They're slow and almost trivial to walk around.
well, they'll eventually get them in groups, so it's kind of harder to get around
Yeah.
them. But my point was that it tears down that God Jesse moment where
You're,
it's
you're
like,
no longer able to kill
Yeah.
and destroy everything.
yeah,
Sure.
so it grounds the player a bit. Like you can't just muscle through this encounter.
I think like an enemy that reminds me of that I think is a lot better is like the regenerators from Dead Space. It's like you can't escape from these things. You can slow them down, but they're coming for your ass. And that was
Enlighten me.
great. So it's essentially like this big like
Well, sorry. First of all, every enemy in Dead Space you can kill.
Yeah.
Just about, except
for this huge I can't remember what they call them, some sort of morph, necromorph.
Is it also a big spiky pulse ball?
No, it's like most of the enemies are all humanoid in some like grossly mutated way.
Some body horror.
Yeah, so like you can like slow it down by like shooting its limbs and stuff like that, and like while you're trying to solve a puzzle, maybe it's just like a torso on the ground, but it's always going to come back up and get you.
Okay.
like it cannot be
Yeah.
killed.
So it's a similar idea, but with a different aesthetic over it.
Different aesthetic, and in terms of gameplay, way more threatening.
Mm.
Like if you're in an area, you're like panicking. Like,
But then again, we get into the Control isn't a horror game. In
Well,
Dead Space
that's
is
exactly
kinda,
it. That's exactly
so,
it.
so I guess, but like you want to talk
Because
about
Isaac Clarke is weak as fuck.
yeah,
Runs slow as hell.
sure. But like if we want to talk about building tension, like the
Right.
first time I saw the thing in Control, I thought, okay, like I don't know what this is. Like, okay, definitely steer clear away of this thing because I cannot do anything about this.
yeah,
But
because
then
they
after a
introduce it
while-
in a controlled environment.
yeah. But then after a while, it's like I ain't got to worry about these things.
Yeah.
I can fly, motherfucker.
Yeah.
Like, what? Are you kidding me?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, can you fly?
to be fair, the first time I got to the Black Rock Quarry, which is
Yeah.
where there's a big grouping of these things, I didn't have the levitate
I didn't
ability.
either. I didn't find a
Yeah,
problem.
so okay, okay, Mr. Big Shot.
Yeah.
But yeah, so once you get the levitate ability, it becomes easier unless they are in a confined space and you do have to kind of force your way around. But yeah, I don't know. I did think they were a good addition because they are a neutral enemy type.
Yeah,
There was
I did like that part.
Yeah, there was a few times where I walked into that quarry and them and the hiss are just going at it. I just sort of sneak around the outside and let them do their
Yeah,
thing.
they're definitely interesting. It just, I guess, kind of highlights the sort of divide between the genre and the game, which
Mhm. Should they have been more tense? and
Well,
develop.
I don't know. It's hard. I don't want to say this game should have been like a linear survival horror because I already did that. That was
Yeah.
Alan Wake. And I mean, I like the gameplay. I think it's fun.
Mhm.
And I don't know. It's kind of a weird blending for
No,
me.
I still stand by that. I found it effective at least, but I can also see why you wouldn't at the same time.
Yeah. Well, to move on to the story a bit, because we've been talking about gameplay for about an hour now. There is quite a lot of narrative and storytelling elements present in this game, like obviously. Personally, I found that the main story was actually quite compelling up until like the very end, where I think it fell apart a
Well,
lot.
what part did you find compelling about it?
So I thought it was actually a really interesting narrative choice to have your main character show up at the start and become the director right off the
Yeah,
bat. Like that's the first thing that happens. I thought that was like really interesting
almost
because
the being closest to the corpse.
yeah, pulling a sword from a stone, so to speak. I thought that was really interesting, and it's like, obviously, smart choice to make it so the main character has no idea what's going on, so you kind of learn
You
the
just
world
get thrown
along with
into it.
her.
Mhm.
I thought one thing that actually helps you kind of, um, well, I don't know why I want to say fall in love with, but because that's not the right phrase. Like one of the things that kind of attaches you to Jesse more is her like internal monologue,
Mm.
Mhm.
her like talking to herself. Like she'll be talking to Emily Pope, one of the scientists, or whoever else, Ati, and she'll kind of like think
Yeah,
to
there'll be a
herself.
little aside and
She'll say, be skeptical or have some kind of sass.
And I
Mhm.
thought at the beginning, I agree. I thought it was really good. I thought the first interactions with Jesse and Pope were really good, and I thought
Mhm.
the voice acting was good. But I think it's all downhill from there.
Yeah, I think the beginning is very strong for sure, and I think like you said, the story kind of meanders
Well,
around a bit.
even so, before we get off the topic of Jesse's inner monologue, I found it to be kind of like annoying at a lot of parts,
Later in the game, I
where
kind
she
of
would either
yeah.
think exactly what she was just about to say, think the only possible thing I as the player could be thinking, or just like say stuff. So I thought that Dylan, when you finally find Dylan and he's like got this whole psychosis going on, I thought he was
Mhm.
gonna be a great character. He's gonna have a great moment. But it's ruined and broken up by Jesse's stupid inner monologue, just thinking these stupid things while this guy's going crazy in front of her. Totally
I
ruined
can
that.
agree with that.
Yeah, I think that using that monologue aside sparingly is a better way to do it,
Mhm.
where, it's something that adds some character to her and,
Well,
something that the player might not be thinking
I think
themselves.
it could be a great tool used to like reveal Jesse's inner motives, and at some point, it's
Mhm.
used to that point effectively.
Yeah, more
But
more than a few times,
for
yeah.
the most part, it's just like shut up. Like,
Well, the other thing that's interesting to me about the internal monologue and Polaris, the kind of
Unexplained.
yeah,
otherworldly entity that kind of lives inside Jesse, um, what I thought was interesting, I don't know if this really ends up being the case in the end, but when I first started playing, I thought that Polaris was kind of uh, a link to us playing the game.
yeah, that's what I thought so too.
Really?
Or that they were us.
Oh, I see what
Jesse
you
speaks to
mean.
Polaris and she says you, as in she's addressing Polaris, but she says you. And to me, I was like, oh, am I in the game? Which I thought was actually really cool because I thought this would fit the genre really
That's
well.
interesting
Like,
because that
Yeah,
it's not how I saw it,
it's like
but
well, it ends up being that's not really the
no.
case.
yeah. But maybe they were trying to sort of make that kind of the case throughout the game. I don't
Well,
know.
it seems like she's talking to you because she's say like, "Oh, you're guiding me
Yeah.
or whatever," and I'm like,
So
"Yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
that's
you're right. We're in
totally
this
what it was
together.
doing.
Let's do this." And I thought that was a really like interesting way of like blending the player into the world in a way that actually
Yeah,
makes some
playable
amount of
character
sense.
talks to you.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, and I hadn't considered it that way at all, but it is an interesting way to because it's kind of breaking the fourth wall and that that you are controlling this thing or you're involved in this and not just experiencing it.
Mhm.
And it didn't feel like a cheap
Mm,
thing.
It didn't either at all. No, I didn't think so at all.
but it's funny because despite that, I felt Polaris was completely let down by the end of the game. Like,
Oh, by then for
yeah,
sure.
you go
Yeah, I
through
would
and you're
agree.
like, wow, like, what's the thing behind this? Like, what's its relationship to the hiss? Because there's clearly some relationship that's being suggested through.
Because they can resist. It's like the only force in the game
Yeah, and
known
then
to be able to
somehow they're
resist the
similar because
hits.
they're both like uh you know,
from the
yeah, both
slidescape.
from the
Yeah.
slidescape, both sort of affect the world around them. And as you find out,
without having a physical
yeah,
presence.
and as you find out, Polaris is what the HRAs, the Hedron,
Resonance amplifiers.
yeah, that it's what's giving them the power essentially to resist the hiss.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And so you're looking forward to having some kind of explanation there, or even just more of an explanation, not an absolute explanation. And you get to the end of the game, it's like, ooh, like
It
there just
just
isn't
it
anything.
completely drops
Yeah.
off.
But also, I think the relationship with Jesse and Dylan is interesting, and Dylan as a character himself.
I think that's just like a mound of missed potential.
Well,
So much potential. I just think they missed the mark a lot.
well, I actually, because leading up to before you find
I
Dylan,
actually meet him. Yeah.
yeah, he's kind of presented as this menacing, seems to have some kind of plan. Like, he looks like has some ideas, and he's
Yeah.
putting things into motion.
And he's got this feeling like this guy's very powerful.
Yeah, and you get to him and he's completely broken, which I actually preferred, because it's like you get to him, it's like, well, yeah, of course this guy is completely just broken psychotically. Like, they're psychologically, he's been held captive in a federal prison essentially, having tests done on him for over like
Yeah, but as
most of
far as
his
you can
life.
tell, he's just like that because of the hiss.
No, I think I don't think so. Like, he kind of suggests that you're listening to, if you were just listening to the audio, like with his interviews and stuff,
Yeah.
he was breaking this whole time. Like, they were prodding him, they were
Yeah.
doing all these things, and eventually he was broken and he let the hiss in. And that
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
just
that's true.
amplified it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'll agree with Cam. I think the first time you see Dylan was a bit of a letdown for
Mm.
me as well. I was expecting more. Like, it seemed they were really building it up like, oh, once you find Dylan, like, that's
I
going to
thought
be
there
the
was
real
gonna be like
turning
this big
point. That's going to
confrontation
be
too, because when you find like his first containment cell, there's like
Oh,
some
it's all
dialogue and
yeah.
stuff. It's like
Yeah.
he like blames you for like abandoning him and all this sort of stuff. Okay, and then you meet him. It's like, ah,
and you meet him and he just kind of floats
yeah,
there and
and
spouts
then
scripture.
it's like he doesn't even know you because he's controlled by the hiss at some level.
Well, he did know.
He
did
yeah,
know who
but
it
like
was,
he has like nothing really to say to you.
I mean, you're right. I
That
do
makes any
think
sense.
that the potential was let down, but I don't agree that how he was as a character inherently was the wrong way to do it. Like, I don't think it would have been better if he was more put together and was more like,
He doesn't have to be more put together. He could be just as crazy and doing gibberish, but don't interrupt him constantly and make him do something.
yeah, no, I agree with the make him do something, because the final fight of the game,
Yeah.
you expect you expect this crazy boss battle against this otherworldly force, and it's just wave after wave of the same things you faced.
Yeah, they could have had like some insane like monster to represent like the hiss
Yeah.
like body or like
Or
the
how
hiss
it distorted
host or
him,
whatever.
it's taking
Yeah,
over.
Or the
yeah.
hiss creates a desk mecha and they had to fight that.
Which would have been better, honestly.
It would have been better.
Because you just jump across some platforms, get to them, force mind control them, and that's the end of the main story.
That's it. Literally just
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Like if you were to describe how it ends, you say it just ends.
Game's over.
But it's funny because the main story, I think we all agree, is kind of a letdown in a way.
By the
Yeah,
end.
because you have so much expectations and they're not met in a way.
I think sort of through the middle was kind of a letdown too, because like I understand that like you're learning about the world and stuff like that, but there weren't like any like major plot points where that like would string it along. It's like it's hours before you like learn what Dylan is, and even after that, it's hours until you like actually find him and like get to interact with him. And by that time, you're so like, at least for me, I was so detached from like the enjoyment I was having and the enthrallment I was enjoying at the beginning of the narrative. It's hours later and nothing in the main story's really happening.
Yeah, I think the game definitely relies on the secondary stuff happening
I feel like I say
keep
this a
you
lot
interested.
about, and I feel like it's about a lot of games. Condense it. Just
Mm.
condense it. Like there's some good bits here. Just condense it. Make
Well,
the
I think
game the good bits.
The thing is, the game was already fairly condensed. That there just was a lack of content in that middle to end section Like there wasn't really much you could have condensed there to like if you did, it would have been a 5 hour long game.
I think that would have been better for me.
Maybe, but I think
Maybe not
personally,
5 hours, but if it was 10 hours and just like more stuff happened, that's the two ways. It's like either add more stuff or make it shorter.
mm, but the thing is what's enjoyable about the game for me personally was all the other stuff, like the world you're exploring, the side missions, all the other like secondary things
Yeah.
that string it along so you
No, and
continue.
I agree, but
Yeah.
then it returns me another point. It's like, why don't I just go read the SCP wiki?
Yeah, I think there's a kind of a disconnect between the main story and the lore of the world that they wanted to build. It seems like they were way more interested in building the world
Mm,
and having like interesting side things to build it
Yeah.
out than having kind of a compelling main story, which I think is a little
which is
Well,
funny considering
I
how
think there's
strong it started.
could be which is I guess why one reason I was led astray. But I think you can have a really like it could have been a great game, which is like a ridiculously strong world, and main plot points kind of happen here and there. But like it felt like the main plot was at times the only thing happening, but at the same time nothing was happening. You're just like going through areas for I don't know
I
to
mean,
help people out.
how about this? If there were no secondary missions, like no other world building missions, no other side things, would you feel satisfied playing the game?
If there are no other side things.
Yeah, if it was just the main storyline.
No, because because as I said, that kind of sucks.
Yeah.
But I mean, like the side content was the best part of the games. But like condense the main story, get rid of it.
Mm,
well. I like to think of God of War 2018, which is a game that has a little bit of side content, but not a ton.
Yeah,
Like it has what, like 4 side
mm.
quests, like that are actually
yeah,
substantial. So I mean, if we just condense it down to just like the 4 best side quests in Control, just put those in,
yeah,
get rid of the busy work, get rid of the fucking bureau
yeah.
alerts. You know what I mean? Get rid of the board countermeasures. Just focus on what's
Yeah.
good. You know what I mean? Get rid of the busy work.
Mm.
And I think in God of War 2018, I feel like that's what they did. There was only a few side quests, and all of them were of the highest
Yeah.
I think
quality.
the
Well, I
thing
think that's it's a good comparison, but it's tough to compare anything to God of War, just because like
Well,
the caliber of that game is just astonishing.
well,
But you're right in the same way that they didn't muck about with stupid shit. They
yeah,
didn't waste your
they
time.
knew they wanted it to be a narrative driven, like straightforward game. Like you're focusing on the story, the relationship between Kratos and his son.
Yeah.
That's what the game is. Control isn't that game. They could have done that. They could have just been the relationship between Jesse and Dylan, or Jesse and Polaris, Jesse and the Hiss.
They could have told any story at all.
well, it would have been interesting to see more of those things that you just mentioned.
But I think the thing is that they wanted the game to be a bit more open, a bit more about Jesse becoming the director of this thing. And
Okay, sure, and maybe you're right, but at the same point, I think she follows the Arthur Morgan character progression in that there's very little to no character progression. They just tell you that so at one point, this is another thing that's like totally throwaway. Is like at one point her inner monologue got so drab and she's like, "Oh, they shouldn't rely on me. They don't know how I fail people." Then there's no past to back that up, no future to like why did you even say that? It's just like there's no character she gets all these psychic powers, monotone the whole way. Doesn't change her cadence or tone. Like
She's pretty
hardly
chill
even
about
once.
it.
Yeah,
well, there was part of the game that I actually started thinking, like, what if this is all just some trip? Like, she is absolutely just imagining this whole thing.
she's
Because
still in the scrapyard.
yeah,
high as fuck.
well, you eventually come across some uh, therapy recordings, I think it was, and
Yeah,
it's the therapist like, this isn't real. Like you got to accept these losses of your family, your brother, the town. Like these terrible things happen, and you need to deal with it. And she's like, no, 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 government, they did it. Like so, it's fairly typical, I guess, in terms of that. Like you're imagining this, you're paranoid, imagining these things to cope with some terrible stuff that's happened, or etc. And it started making me think, like, oh, that could be interesting if this is all just her coping
If
mechanism.
this was the case.
yeah.
Because it does then explain why she's so just nonchalant about it all, why everything seems to revolve around her.
Yeah,
And, it gives explanation to why that her family was taken, why Dylan's taken, what happened to her, what happened to her friends. And so that would I thought would have been an interesting thing. And for a few hours I was thinking that maybe it is the case. And eventually I think that they clarify, I guess, that that isn't the case, that these are, this is real in universe, that
Mhm.
this is all happening.
Well, I think they do that a lot, and I mean, like we said, with this kind of genre of speculative fiction is like about presenting the question without necessarily answering it, and I
Mhm.
think maybe they do that too much.
Well, sometimes
I
they do
think
it too much, and then sometimes they do it for the wrong things. Like
Mm,
for me, I want to talk about one specific example where at one point it turns out that like Jesse's subject 6, right? Like they've been secretly like watching
7.
her or 7.
Yeah.
Sorry. Oh right, sorry. She's secretly in the prime candidates thing, and that's why she was able to become like the director and this stuff. But it just felt like such a narrative cop out. Just like
How so?
'cause they didn't build this up. They're just like, oh yeah, by the way, like we've been keeping tabs on her the whole
Well, that
time.
that was part of what built up my idea that it was in her head. It's
Yeah.
like the government has been watching her this whole time. Like,
Yeah. And
yeah.
maybe that would have been a good choice, but it just like I would have rather them not explain that like Jesse's able to just become the director like that, or that
Mm,
she has like latent like telekinetic abilities, right?
mhm.
We're just saying that like,
Like, that isn't one of the questions we needed answered.
yeah, it's not. And
Yeah.
then it just feels like a cop out to something that I didn't even need more explained.
Mm.
It just felt lazy.
well, in the same vein of cool ideas I had about the world based on what they showed me, there's one part where Dylan says to Jesse, like, "Isn't it weird that both of our names are kind of like gender neutral?
Yeah.
They
Like
could have
it
been
could
the
be for
same
either a boy
person
or a girl."
almost, or
And I was like, "Oh, damn! Did like one kid go into the slidescape and like two
Oh
came
yeah.
out?"
Oh, okay.
And I was like, "Ooh, okay, seems pretty cool."
Alright.
That's a great
Didn't
idea.
I don't know. Didn't
Yeah.
happen as far as I
Well,
can tell.
we'll wait till the sequel,
Just
I
like
guess, but
everything else, they just dropped it
Well, I'm pretty
entirely.
sure if you read the notes and stuff in the game, it's like 100%
Mm.
deconfirmed. Like they were both
Yeah.
children going
Yeah.
in, which I don't know. Anyway, I guess I can't complain for we can't really complain for our
Yeah.
imaginations running wild, but
But I
But
think
at the
it's
same
I think it's
time,
more so the reason we complain is that the things we thought of were more interesting than what it ended up being.
yeah. And like these
right,
guys are
right.
supposed to be writers.
And they clearly are because they gave us these ideas
Well, you say
with what they
clearly, but they're finished. Like
uh,
if you believe in Finland.
Wow,
here's
that's
the
a whole
deeper
nother
mystery here.
conversation.
Does this game even exist?
Holy shit. Okay, well, hang on. I want
Maybe
to
reel us
steer
back
away
in.
from let's steer away from this for a second. There's a part in the main story where, spoiler, Polaris is destroyed, the physical representation of it, and Jesse's taken over by the Hiss briefly. At which point the credits play, the dead ass credits play, except they're like
They
distorted,
become
and
distorted
it
and fever dreamy.
becomes kind of a fever dream, and and then you have to find your way out of that. How do we feel about fake out endings in games in general?
I like it.
I
Yeah.
thought it could have been good.
Yeah, I think that this one in particular was well done because I mean, hell, it got me. Like the credits started rolling. I'm like, nah, like there's no way this is if this ends now, like I'm mad. Like and then it
Well, I
starts
had that
getting glitched
I
moment.
was
out and it's
already
like,
mad.
hold on, like what's happening? And then it fully glitches out and you're like, okay, like I'm for this. And then you end up in that fever dream where you gotta just do the one thing over and over
For
again.
me, it kind of adds to like how you're talking about like Jesse talks to Polaris as it's you. And I sort of, and with the SCP thing, I kind of like the idea of having more like fourth wall breaks and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And just sort of like distortions in the game messing with the player kind of thing.
Yeah,
So
like
from
it's
that,
already weird.
from
So
that,
yeah.
I like it.
Uh, Personally, I kind of don't like fake out endings. I feel like they're usually kind of cheap. I mean, I had that moment where it started happening. I was like, "Oh, like did I get the bad ending? Like did I what choices did I make mess up, right?" The reason I don't like it is because like you can, as a developer, you can play the credits at any time if you want, right? You know
Midway
what I mean?
through.
You have that
Yeah.
power. And I mean, uh, what are we to do other than think that
Well, I
it's
think
over?
the reason it can be effective is it subverts your expectation. It's
Sure,
you
sure.
suddenly think, oh, damn, like okay, like that's it, like, and you start thinking like, why was that the ending? Like, was there more? All this, so you start being like, oh, and then it comes back, and you're like, oh no, I'm happy it's back, and there's more interesting stuff going.
Well, hold on a second, because when you roll the credits, that is a fourth wall
Yeah.
break, right?
Yeah.
This is the real world now. This is because it's the real credits for the
Yeah.
first bit. It's like Sam Lake's the writer, Mikhail Kasurinen is the director. It's like the real credits. So I'm like, okay, like these are the actual people that made the game. And why is that playing when the hiss takes over Jesse? Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. I think you can have kind of a weird moment where like something really strange happens, which they
Yeah.
do with Jesse
Well, my
appearing,
thing I thought
in
was
the
it was
bureau.
like Jessie gets corrupted by the hiss, game's over, then she like I guess
Brings it back
she
or
like
something.
willed herself out of the credits, I guess.
Yeah. That
Out of the
Yeah.
credits,
Yeah.
though, that's so
well, I
strange.
guess it's the game itself, like I said, it's already weird in what it deals with. So stretching your imagination isn't like you're sitting there like, hold on, they just rolled the credits. The game isn't involved in the story. Like you're kind of already along for the ride with like the weird stuff that's happening. So for me at least, I didn't question that. Like I'm not sitting there like, wait, is she, is what's happening in the game interacting with the game itself? Like are they acknowledging the game exists in this world as like something that's manipulatable?
I just wish it went faster. Like the amount of time that you spend like actually watching the credits. Like if it was like they say a thing and you get through like like
The first
two
couple
first
scrolls.
couple of names and then they pull it out, it's like okay, cool. So it was like a quick fake out, but not the way it was. It was like, oh, all right, I guess I'll emotionally prepare myself for that to be the end of the game.
Yeah. Well, what I do like about the credits, and here's what I think they could have done. What I like about the credits is that it's this like really weird, trippy, like
Yeah.
distorted thing. The credits give way to like the incantation they
hmm
call it, the words that the hiss hosts keep spreading. So that's really cool. I like that. Why not just make that the real credits to the game? That would be so
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool. Well, it's because the game doesn't end with like a bad ending, I guess.
But you could end it with like an interesting ending where it's like, oh,
Yeah.
like
They they
what's going on
definitely should
here?
have ended it with an interesting ending.
This is what I think. So it's I don't hate the fake out ending. I think it could have been really interesting to make the ending like, oh geez, what's going on here? Like this doesn't look so good.
Yeah, that's true.
Which comes back to, the reason they didn't do that is because it's an open world game. They have side quests. So like, oh well, the player's gonna
Oh
want to
yeah.
jump back
Well, it's
in,
funny you mentioned that because I
go
actually
clean stuff
thought
up.
that this game in particular handles post game content better than any I've seen. Most games that allow you to continue to play after you've beat the game, completed the main storyline, it's either you get, oh, okay, you can go back and do a new game plus and whatever, or it puts you back in the world, but just before you completed the
With
final
no
mission.
explanation.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's it doesn't acknowledge what you've done has happened, and you can't explore it, and interact with the world after that. So this is one of the first games I've played where you beat the main storyline, go back in because like you said, there's going to be more you want to do because it's a bit open world. But you go back in, it's like no, this did happen. You did do these things, and the world acknowledges it and evolved through it.
I think that's kind of cool, except you sacrifice the ending. The ending sucks ass. I would have much rather just gone back to right before the ending if there was actually like a satisfying
Well, I
conclusion.
think there could have been a more satisfying conclusion and still have done this. I mean, I don't think this relied on it not having a more impactful
Well,
ending.
I feel like an impactful ending would have been you deal with the hiss. You have a confrontation with the hiss. You kind of solve the problem.
Well, I can see the hiss persisting through the end of this game. I can see it still being an issue before the sequel. um, but I think for this game, a more impactful ending would have been uh, something bigger to do with Dylan. He was the main goal of the story. Finding him and saving him or getting him back or whatever. So I think if they had created a more impactful final encounter with him, that would have been
Yeah,
satisfying enough.
sure.
You
Or
know,
like if you do defeat the hiss and like, oh, there's random remnants for God knows whatever reason. Sure, but
and that's
like,
kind of what they say. Like you have put the hiss back into wherever it came from, and there are remnants that are still around. Like you are,
Well, and then you run out into the world to look for old stuff, and random encounters pop up. The hiss is
yeah.
alive and well. You run into the DLC. There's hiss
yeah,
everywhere.
you might as well have not actually finished the game. And the
Mm,
other thing about games that do bring you back right towards the ending, where you have to start New Game Plus, is their side content actually has story and point to it? Whereas this is just like it's the hiss fucking around or it's altered items fucking around. Which I mean, either one
Maybe.
you could do at any point in the game.
I don't know. I really enjoyed the idea that the character evolved. Like she's now really become the director, embraced the role, and everyone around her is also
It's
evolved.
time to embrace the role as a janitor's assistant, like we were told.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know. I liked that, you talk to Emily Pope afterwards, and you discuss what's happened. You give her a promotion to head of research, and then she asks you to do some stuff or to help her with something else now that this has happened. And you have to go find Marshall because she's still missing. And
Yeah,
Well,
I mean,
that's
I
DLC,
think that stuff's interesting.
Yeah.
oh.
Yeah, that's the first one, the foundation. And I mean, that stuff's interesting. It's nice to see the kind of the falling action, the post climax to the game. But
But it gives you a reason to get back in and not feel like it's just ignoring what's happened.
Sure.
yeah,
But again, I already had a reason to get to that point.
Well, that's a that's a you thing.
I don't know.
all right. Well, to move on a bit to, I guess, some of the more like presentation aspects of the game. Like I said already, I really like finding like the notes and not only just that, but they have all kinds of like live action videos with Dr. Darling, and they have the puppet shows with the Threshold kids, which I think are all really fun to watch and I think really interesting. And I've said enough about game flow, so I won't talk about that. I think that stuff is like of really high quality and really builds out the world like
Absolutely.
in a nice way. And not only that, but kind of the musical inclusions, like the diegetic music, if you will, things that they've added in the world. There's the kind of the old gods of Asgard, which is a callback to Alan Wake, and the take control bit in the Ashtray Maze. I think all of those are a lot of really fun and good bits of presentation, good bits of
Yeah,
production.
no, I 100% agree. I think that it might have been weird for some people, like you're watching, especially like the Dr. Darling little
Yeah.
mockumentaries. Uh, it's these are live action clips in a video game, and,
Mhm.
and one might assume that would be jarring for a player. Seeing the in-game engine up next to a real life video of people.
A character that you never see in the actual engine itself.
Yeah, and but I actually thought it worked.
Well, smart choice for that reason.
Thought it
Yeah.
worked really well because it kind of allows you to suspend your own disbelief and makes the in-game engine a bit more real in a way because you're watching this. It's like, yeah, that's real people. So this is real people. It wasn't as jarring as one might expect it to be, and especially the acting. Like the acting could have been terrible and just
Yeah, no.
completely taken you out of it.
Darling was
but
really good.
yeah, especially
Really
when you kind of get to
expressive
the
and-
end of his kind of
Yeah. He's probably the best acted character, best presented
yeah.
character.
I'm glad you said exactly that because in Alan Wake, made by the same studio, about 10 years prior, they have similar motifs of like live action sequences played, on television sets in the game, contrasted with the actual game graphics. Obviously, Alan Wake doesn't look so great these days. Um, but what's really stands out about those videos is that the acting is terrible.
Oh, really?
And it's really weird and it's like super jarring. And I
But
don't know,
is it like supposed to be tacky and
so that's
Can
the
be.
thing. Possibly? It's not clear. It's
Sure,
not
it's
not
super
out,
not
so-
enough that you'd be like, oh, okay, this is what they're
This
going
is
for.
really
yeah,
supposed to be
it's
bad,
not
yeah.
super clear. They have actors on screen who I assume are Finnish because they've dubbed over all their voices
Oh,
in
really?
English,
Oh,
which
that's
is
funny.
kind of, it makes it weird. So I don't know if that was a conscious choice or I don't know.
I
Hard to
don't
say.
know.
But anyway, I'm glad you brought that up because the acting does make it a lot better. And
Yeah.
I know that for a fact.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think
It's true
another.
because if Darling was bad, you'd probably just like keep walking.
Yeah,
by.
Exactly. Yeah.
No, I think you mentioned the what was it, the treasure trove kids,
The Threshold kid.
threshold kids. Yeah, yeah. The first time I found that, holy shit, that that's another thing that added to tension for me, like
Mhm.
because it's unsettling.
Yeah, those are some odd little clips.
Well, because it's funny. There's actually this TV show called Channel Zero, which is another
Right.
adaptation of SCP content. And but one point being, one of them is about
The
Candle
Candle
Cove.
Cove. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I thought that's what you were talking about.
which is the same idea with these like unsettling puppet show kind of children's TV show, and it was very, very reminiscent of the Threshold Kids.
So I really like the Threshold Kids, the actual content of it. I think it's like, well, it would really be at home in like a survival horror game.
Yeah.
Again,
Uh,
not to take away from it. I think it's great. What I don't like is that there's a note you can find somewhere that explains why it exists.
oh, really?
That
Oh,
completely ruins the
Oh,
whole
okay, well,
thing.
that's
yeah.
disappointing. I never
It's
came across that one.
well,
Again, a constant theme of explaining the one thing I don't want to.
100%. Like it's basically like it's a memo from like one bureau employee that says like, "Oh, hey, we should come up with this children's show for like Dylan." Well, they don't.
Uh,
It says redacted, but it's Dylan.
mhm.
And it's like, oh, we could call it the Threshold Kids and all this stuff. And I'm like, well, if it was made by a bureau employee, why is it a fucking nightmare? But if you don't explain it, it's like, whoa, like what's this like haunted
Yeah,
TV
yeah.
show that's showing up? So
Mhm.
It's cursed
this
TV
close
show.
to greatness
Yeah.
in so many aspects.
Hmm. Yeah, no, another part, like the actual engine itself isn't particularly pretty. It's nothing crazy.
Especially when characters are trying to speak. Sometimes that looks
Yeah,
pretty
sometimes it's a bit
bad.
janky.
Yeah.
I think that especially, and I think the strongest part of the engine is the actual lighting in the game and in the engine. I think that we didn't have a chance to play this version, but the PC release, if you have a computer capable of using it, and I think the PS5 and yeah, the PS5 version also can use ray tracing. So a lot of the effects kind of take advantage of that, and a lot because there's a lot of very strong light throughout the game through Windows natural light, and LED neon light, and all of it interacts with the environment really well. And a lot of the best character discussion moments have very strong lighting involved in them.
Mm.
Some of the weaker ones are the more flat lighting where you
Yeah.
don't really get much distinction in the faces and it looks kind of flat. But yeah, while I don't think the engine itself is particularly pretty or like the art style of it,
Yeah.
I think that the effects they use and the environments they create, the colors they use are really pretty.
They can be at times.
Especially there's one in particular is the effect when you shoot the hiss enemies or
Oh, the kind of distortion
when they
effect.
Yeah.
vaporize. Yeah, there's this sort of chromatic or prismatic vapor effect, and that like I have not seen that in any other game that I can think of.
Yeah.
That style of effect, I think it works perfectly for what I assume they intended it to look like, and
It looks great. The only issue is that sometimes there's like a sneaky rocket hiding in it and just like flying towards you. And then beneath all like the particle effects, you just get blown up for some reason. You're like, okay, cool.
Yeah, the visuals do get pretty busy sometimes.
and to the detriment of some of our consoles, I think.
Well, yeah, it depends. It occurs to me that we all have PS4s of differing qualities.
Yeah.
Cam's being the best and Evan's
Yeah.
being the worst.
Yeah,
So I didn't understand that there were so many issues with it. So on the PS4 Pro that I have, the only issue that really happens is coming in and out of menus is really janky. Sometimes the map will break, but most of the time it's fine. But
That's pretty much
from what
my
I
experience
hear,
as well.
is it?
Yeah.
From what I hear from some people, it's like as soon as there's like enemies on
yeah,
screen,
more than like
your
5-6
frame rate
enemies.
starts chugging.
Yeah.
The
No, it was
can't
not a
hear the
good
game
time.
over
A
the
lot of
PS4 fan.
no, there was quite the times that my PS4 could not handle it, and it got to the point where I did die a few times because the frame rate got so bad that I'd get lost in the environment and
Yeah.
just you can't react to things. But it didn't happen that often, but often enough that it was like annoying.
Yeah.
And the standout moment for me was I was playing the run up battle to save Polaris and the Hedron, and it crashed midway through. Like I had some crazy momentum going in the story and everything, and I think I had the ability where you can launch multiple objects, and there was one of those juggernauts shooting grenades. So I'm like, oh ho ho, just you wait. And then I grabbed 2 or 3 grenades, whip them at the guy, and just bang, PS4 is done.
You're gonna
Call
whip
it a
him
day.
at your
Like it
PS4.
literally, like a frame happened of the explosion, and it died.
Pack it up, boys. We're outta here.
So that was disappointing to say the least.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a shame.
But that is clearly more an issue of, this is a OG PS4. Like it is not probably up fully to the task of running this game perfectly.
Well, okay, so another thing, like there's some things that look really great, but like it's not a graphically intense game to the point where you feel like it should break any PS4.
Well, probably the biggest amount of like draw on the system comes from the amount of detail in the world, the amount of like particles and
I would
objects and
assume the
enemies,
particle, yeah.
because the world is like insanely detailed with the amount
Yeah.
of like little objects, because
And
they
they don't
wanted
really
to
skimp on draw distance ever.
no, and
Yeah, but they do skimp on the level of detail popping. Unfortunately, for me at least, I'm not sure about you
Oh,
guys,
really?
but
Like I had a couple of texture popping moments, but it wasn't bad.
yeah, I'll show some now. But there were some moments where I'm walking up to things and I'm like, hold on a sec, like, nah.
Suddenly, like a door will phase in.
Well, yeah, I'm looking, walking down like a very small hallway with posters along it, and it's just, they just look like blocks of color, like.
Oh yeah.
And then I'll stand there because I'm like curious, like, okay, how long is it gonna take for this game to load in this one texture? And there was moments where it's like 10 seconds plus of standing there waiting for a higher level of detail asset to pop in. And it got really bad more than a few times. And
Yikes.
again, probably an issue of just PS4 not being able to handle it, the base model. But
yeah, that's a big shame, because in my first few hours of playing, I remember thinking and being really impressed by how crisp the fidelity was on a lot of these smaller objects. I mean,
mhm.
Yeah.
obviously, well, I guess I had a slightly more powerful PS4, but I remember being like so impressed because in, I don't know, maybe communications, like early on, you can find like a whiteboard that has this
Oh
entire
yeah.
paragraph like of
Yeah.
text written out,
Yeah.
and you
You
can
can read
read
it.
the whole
Yeah.
thing. And I'm like, 10 years ago, this was unheard of. You'd walk up to a poster and it would just be like 8-bit text. Like,
Yeah, it'd be one polygon of like
Or we have to press a button to like
bring
bring it
up.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I will say that as much as I've brought up these technical issues that I had, there are like many, many moments where I had the same thing, where it's like, the level of detail and the crispness of the visuals was amazing and like just awe-inspiring. But aside from that, I mean, another thing that I actually really found really well done was the physics engine.
Mm.
Yeah, so it was actually pretty late in the game that I sort of really took note of it. I think it was in some, employee washroom and I was fighting some not Last of Us enemies, the fungus guys.
right?
Um,
Original concept, do not steal.
yeah. Um, and I think I walked in to pick some stuff up and I noticed that some of the gunshots I had sent in hit some stalls around it, but in a very like believable way. It wasn't just the usual kind of destruction physics or even just, a little texture put over an object of a bullet hole or something. Like these wooden structures were actually falling apart where it was hit and creating splinters and spidering like cracks. And so then I spent like 5 minutes shooting around the washroom, just seeing how the destruction physics engine worked. And it was one of the more detailed ones I've seen in the game. And
Absolutely.
obviously, the physics engine is probably invested in for the telekinesis abilities, I'd assume.
Yeah.
That was definitely part of my magical first couple hours of the game. Or like like I think in parts of early executive where you can shoot wood and how it splinters, or like when you get the dash and you dash by walls with wood veneer, it'll pull it off the walls.
Yeah.
Like that is so cool.
Yeah.
Well, that and like, even just using the melee attack, you can like vaporize glass walls. And
Yeah,
it's so
yeah.
cool because it like creates a hole in the glass kind of in the shape of the impact.
Mm-hmm.
Or like dashing through glass as well.
Yeah, it doesn't just obliterate the whole wall. It
Yeah.
like kind of makes a believable opening in the
Mhm.
material, which is, contrast that to like Battlefield Bad Company 2 where you knife a fence and the whole thing obliterates, you know. Yeah, it's very impressive what they've done with the
Mhm.
destruction physics. for sure.
Even just smaller things like shooting concrete, right? Just like the particles that fly off and the bullet hole that's
Yeah,
left is
Sure, yeah.
it all looks
absolutely.
pretty good.
And, you'll go through a whole like fight with a bunch of enemies, and you look at like kind of the battleground after, and it's
It's
like
like,
it's
oh my
wild.
god.
Like
It's a
everything's
good
been
thing
like
this house
scattered.
repairs itself, I guess.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the house, I thought it was a really interesting setting for the game. Um, it's kind of you'll hear it talked about a lot as like brutalist architecture. So
Mhm.
like a lot of straight edges, like
Hmm.
concrete, like large imposing form, which I thought was probably a pretty fitting setting for the game and for the design of the building.
Yeah, makes it feel like very corporate and like
But also
official.
imposing.
Right,
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Which, kind of has an air of control, if you will.
Yeah.
No pun intended, but
Well, yeah, I mean, you say that, and I think one moment in particular, and one room in particular, really, is when you first walk into Central Executive, and it's this huge, like 5-story plus, like room with huge amounts of natural light coming in, and like employees floating around and like
mhm.
chanting and everything, and it really is a striking area. And it's like that in a lot of the different rooms in this building. And it's almost more interesting than just having an open world outside somewhere. Because you're used to the usual like areas you play in, like forests, plains, cities, whatever. But this is a contained space.
and contained spaces give you more opportunities to do more directed stuff, right?
Yeah. And despite it being contained, because of the explanation of what this building is in universe, they could do whatever they want with it. It can be as big as they want. It can branch how they want it to. It can have whatever architecture they want it to.
I want to say quickly that that was one of my favorite like explanations of like a very gamey trope is that the oldest house is bigger on the inside than it looks on the outside. I
Yeah,
was like,
Yeah.
there it is. You just explained it all. I'm in.
yeah,
You make it
it
as big
fits
as you want.
perfectly with the universe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that.
That's funny. They do mention a lot, and there's a lot of posters around about the house like shifting.
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
I think one of my favorite little posters is you don't get paid. Like time on the clock isn't counted towards like if you get moved around the house
Yeah, or if you get
shifting.
like locked in the house,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's
It
like that
says
doesn't
like
count.
time
Yeah.
spent in the astral plane does not
Yeah.
count as extra billing. Yeah.
But
It's
it's
too
funny because
funny.
they kind of like put this like, oh, the house shifts like it has like its own like mind of its own, and it never does shift. Like
It
there's the
only
moments
shifts
where
when
you
you get to
cleanse the
control points.
hiss, yeah,
Yeah.
but that's just cleansing it. It's not really like moving around. And like
And that's another thing they could have done with a really cool area is you're walking through it and the walls start shifting and
which
sliding in
there
front of
is
you.
the ashtray maze,
Yeah, that's the
Well,
biggest
which I don't
representation of
think
that
we.
idea. But
but
Yeah,
it's not like
I know what you mean. It's not the
yeah,
full extent of that
it's not a
idea.
dynamic
well,
experience.
because they tell you pretty early on, like the house shifts, and be careful. But like you just said, it
You never
doesn't
have to.
really.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Like what I'm expecting is areas that I've gone to previously will have changed when I come back.
Hmm.
Yeah. Or closed off or something
Yeah,
will happen, right?
and I can
Leads to a completely new area.
Yeah, I could see why they wouldn't do this because, already it's hard to traverse the space and memorize what it is, and let alone you come back like hours later and it's like, wait a sec, this is not what it was before.
Yeah.
Like, I can
I
see
understand
why,
that.
but also like, come on,
It
you
would
could
have
have
been
done it like a
cool.
little bit.
Again, here we go again. They did it because it's a semi-open world game, so you need to have areas that you go back to be the same because you need to remember them.
But
But you
if
make
it,
it a linear game, you can shift the level however you
You
want.
get all these beautiful scripted moments that you
You
want
can
to
do
have.
whatever you want. You can be
mm,
like, "Oh, we're bringing you back to communications department." You're like, "All right, cool." You walk through the door and it's like a totally different space. You're like, "Whoa."
Yeah.
Now, anyway, again, it's like my imagination running wild with
yeah,
what they could
yeah.
do.
Yeah, I mean, the strongest thing that they've created with this game is just the imagination, like the world, and like what they could do with this universe
Which
now.
is great, to be fair. That is what you want. You do want your story and your world to inspire this kind of
Hmm.
creativity.
Yeah.
Now just back it up
But
with
not to the
the.
point where you wish there was like any extra creativity. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, I think maybe we'll try and close up a bit. Cam, do you want to give your final thoughts?
Sure. I think what I'm going to take away from after this discussion is I really wish it was kind of a linear game because, like, what you've described with Alan Wake and like what we've talked about, what they could do with a linear setting, just feels like it would solve a lot of the issues I have with the game. I think that well, it starts strong. I feel like the gameplay was strong, the story started strong, and then the gameplay gets stale. The story just doesn't move anywhere, and then like the world building, while it was good, it's just like it's not enough to sustain you walking around doing the same old gameplay over and over again. And I feel like there's a lot of things we talked about that could make this better, and I think a lot of it comes down to like I guess Remedy trying to tell a story without actually telling a story. And to me, that's just kind of disappointing. There's not really enough substance here to really, I don't know, make me appreciate it. It just feels like a random, and maybe that's what it meant to be, is like a random collection of ideas, like loosely grouped together, but like only a quarter of the ideas were even worth exploring. So to me, it let me down a bit because I kind of had high expectations going to the game for. I thought it was going to be very atmospheric. I wasn't even concerned about gameplay. I really thought it was just going to be a story driven narrative, but similar to like I played Detroit Become Human recently, and while they try to tell a narrative and try to build a world, they have such a hard time connecting it through gameplay that it just feels so separated, and it almost feels like they chose the wrong medium for what they're trying to do.
Interesting.
Hmm.
What about you, Evan?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, this is kind of like I still stand by that I enjoyed my time with the game. I still look forward to experiencing more of it, hopefully in a sequel or in a bit more of the side content I have left to play. Um, yeah, I from the start I was really engrossed in it. I think the world it presented was interesting. I was invested in the characters. The mysteries were intriguing. You know, it kept me going. It kept me wanting to know more about it. Uh, but again, gameplay came second almost. It didn't. The gameplay didn't carry the game, and maybe it should. Obviously, I think it should have had a bit more. Uh, a bit more polish put into it, I guess, or a bit more fleshing out, maybe. Um, but that isn't to say that I didn't enjoy it while I was playing.
Yeah, I think there's just a few things that could, glaringly be improved, I
Yeah,
think, to really improve the whole thing.
yeah. No, I if there's a Control 2, I'm gonna buy it, and I would still recommend this game to anyone. And I'd still would have recommended it to you, Cam.
Well,
And
I
if you didn't like it, then I wouldn't be upset that you
unless
didn't.
the game's unplayable, I'm never really of the mind of telling people not to play games
Mm.
because like again, it's media. So much of it is subjective. Like where you thought that the gameplay was sort of the letdown, I thought that the gameplay would have been like totally fine if there was a higher emphasis and a better storytelling narrative and it was more
Mm.
narrative driven. I think it'd be like totally serviceable, but
Hmm.
and that's why I wouldn't tell someone not to play it.
Yeah. No, I think this game is worth experiencing, whether you decide you like it or not.
Fair enough. I mean, yeah, I've said already that I really love this genre. Like I used to read like SCP stuff and weird creepy pasta stories as they call them on Reddit,
Yeah.
and I thought it was really cool to see that weird stuff represented in such a high quality product, barring problems with the gameplay or the story or whatever. Truly, it is, you can tell they put a lot of effort into it. And so I thought it was really great to see that represented. And, I was hooked right from the start for that reason. And so anyone who's interested in like SCP or like weird, like science fiction, definitely check it out.
Absolutely.
Um, I quite enjoyed it, problems aside. I think it was fun. And I'll probably play Control 2 or whatever they end up making in the Remedy connected universe, they're calling it.
What do you
Um,
think was a better experience, Control or Alan Wake?
I'm hmm. Yeah, I wasn't
Unsure.
expecting that's a bit of a curveball.
Yeah. Well, I think for me because like I guess one of my disappointments I was expecting to be creeped out all the time. So
Mm.
maybe Alan Wake would be a better experience for me because I like the supernatural when it's very unsettling and unnerving.
Well, what you're gonna tell me is if you play Alan Wake, you're gonna tell me that the dialogue is ham-fisted and the writing is rushed, because it is. It's
Yeah.
worth noting that Remedy has improved a lot since Alan Wake.
So it sounds.
Yeah,
Because when was that released?
I want to say 2010.
So
2009.
decent amount of time.
Yeah,
ago.
quite a long time ago.
Back in the prime of 360, pretty well.
And, you know, it was made by a lot of the same people, the same writer for that game as it is for Control, Sam Lake.
So if anything, it's promising seeing what they've done since then.
Absolutely.
Group of Finnish blokes entering into English media, right? There's going to be some disconnects.
Yeah. So I think I did enjoy Control more, but probably just because it kind of touched on something that I really enjoyed already, that I hadn't really seen before in video games.
Mm-hmm.
It also sounds like just polished better.
Yeah, Alan Wake is a little rough around the edges. Not a bad game, though. But that's going to wrap it up for us for this episode of Game Dive. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next one. Hey folks, this is Perry. Thanks for listening to Game Dive. Make sure to join in on the discussion below and let us know your thoughts on the game, and if you enjoyed the episode, be sure to leave us a like. Game Dive is a monthly podcast, so if you want to hear more from us, you can subscribe or follow to get updated when our next episode airs. See you next time.